The heavy Mississippi humidity clung to the glass walls of the Delta Heritage Country Club. I stood near a towering arrangement of white magnolias holding a crystal flute of sparkling water. Across the polished oak dance floor, my husband Nathan was holding court. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than most people earn in a month. He was the vice president of his family timber export empire, a role that required endless charm and an ironclad grip on local politicians. I thought we were attending this charity auction to support the community and celebrate our successful partnership. Instead, I became a spectator to my own replacement. A woman named Brittany stood inches from his side. She was 25, a junior executive at his firm, and wore an emerald silk dress that pushed the strict boundaries of Southern high society. She held a glass of champagne, tilting her head back to laugh at something Nathan said. Her hand rested on his forearm, her manicured fingers lingering just a second too long against the expensive wool of his sleeve. The jazz band transitioned into a slow tempo, muting the ambient chatter of the room. I took a step forward, intending to join them and remind her of boundaries, but stopped when Brittany leaned into the ear of a fellow junior employee standing nearby. Her voice carried over the quiet snare drum. "Look at this place," Brittany whispered, her painted lips curling into a proprietary smile. Her gaze swept over the crystal chandeliers, the elite politicians, and finally landed directly on Nathan. "Soon this will all be mine." Her friend let out a nervous laugh, shifting her weight in her evening gown. "You are sure he is actually going to do it?" her friend asked, glancing nervously in my direction. Brittany just tossed her dark hair over her shoulder, her eyes gleaming with unfiltered ambition. "Oh, he is already laying the groundwork," Brittany stated, taking a slow sip of her champagne. "He told me the transition will be seamless." My chest tightened, restricting my breath. I looked past the thick green magnolia leaves tracking her line of sight. Nathan had turned away from the local mayor. He was looking straight at Brittany. The distance between them was at least 40 feet, but the current connecting their eyes was undeniable. He offered her a subtle, validating smirk. It was a private confirmation shared in a room filled with 300 of the most influential people in the state. He was not just having a careless weekend fling. He was actively plotting to strip me of my status, erase my contributions, and hand the keys of our shared life to a subordinate. I did not scream. I did not throw my crystal glass onto the oak floor. I just turned around, walked to the valet stand, and prepared to audit his entire existence. Before I continue this story, drop your age in the comments below to let me know who is watching. Hit like and subscribe to Samantha Told Stories if you have ever had to outsmart people who tried to replace you. My name is Kelsey Kelly, and I am 32 years old. I live in the heart of the Mississippi Delta, a place defined by extraordinarily fertile soil, tall pine forests, and a relentless adherence to tradition. For the past 8 years, I have worked as a senior supply chain auditor for a major agricultural logistics firm. My days are spent tracking lost cargo, optimizing shipping routes, and dismantling the lies hidden inside vendor spreadsheets. I view the world in columns of risk and yield. If numbers do not balance, someone is lying. When Nathan finally emerged from the country club and slid into the driver's seat of our luxury sedan, the tension in my jaw was rigid. He drove with a relaxed, careless ease, steering with one hand draped over the leather wheel. The headlights swept across the dark, sprawling timberlines that bordered the highway. He asked standard questions about the auction, commenting on which rival executives overpaid for the charity golf packages. I answered in measured tones, keeping my posture loose against the passenger seat. But within the enclosed space of the vehicle, a damning piece of evidence surfaced. It was a small but undeniable detail. The cloying scent of a cheap synthetic vanilla perfume radiated from the lapel of Nathan's suit jacket. It clashed terribly with the rich smell of the car interior and the expensive cedar cologne he always wore. It was the exact fragrance Brittany had been wearing when she stood near the magnolias. The physical reality of the affair settled over me, not with a sharp sting of heartbreak, but with the chilling weight of a hostile takeover. A man having a temporary indiscretion does not validate a junior employee claiming his entire life. Brittany's confident boast meant Nathan intended a full succession. We pulled into the long, winding driveway of our property. The tires crunched against the pristine gravel, illuminating the towering loblolly pines framing our estate. Nathan parked the car, rolling his shoulders and complaining of a mild headache. He announced he was heading straight to bed to rest up for an early morning board meeting. I played the considerate wife, offering to fetch him a glass of ice water. I watched him ascend the grand wooden staircase with the blissful ignorance of a man who believes he holds every card in the deck. I waited in the dark kitchen. The refrigerator hummed a low, steady drone. I listened to the house settle, counting the minutes until the rhythmic, heavy cadence of his breathing echoed from the master suite down the hall. When silence finally claimed the estate, I did not go to the bedroom. I walked down the corridor to my home office. I stepped inside, locked the heavy oak door, and turned on the single brass desk lamp. The glow cast a pale, clinical light across my face. I booted up my secure workstation. The dual monitors flared to life. Nathan thought he was dealing with an exhausted, predictable wife. He treated me like a decorative fixture he could quietly swap out for a newer model. He had forgotten that he was married to a woman who hunts ghosts in financial ledgers for a living. I opened a fresh encrypted file, cracked my knuckles, and began the hunt. I needed to map the exact geography of his deception. I opened the encrypted banking portals, typing in the credentials he thought were secure. The screen flooded with raw data. Nathan managed the household accounts with a careless hand, assuming I was too busy with my own demanding career to monitor the daily ledgers. I started with the joint checking accounts, filtering the transaction history for the past 6 months. On the surface, everything appeared normal. The mortgage was paid, the utility drafts cleared, and his expensive country club dues were accounted for. But a forensic auditor does not look at the surface. I look for the negative space, the gaps where money quietly bleeds out of the system. I shifted my focus to the holding companies tied to his timber operations. The Delta economy relies on complex networks of agricultural and forestry contracts. It is easy to hide money in the shadows of heavy machinery leasing and export tariffs if no one is looking closely. I isolated the outgoing vendor payments, running a comparative analysis against known regional suppliers. My fingers flew across the keyboard, building pivot tables and sorting the digital noise into clear, concise columns. Around 2 a.m, a discrepancy caught my eye. It was a recurring monthly payment to an independent logistics consultant based out of Jackson. The company name was generic, just a string of initials followed by 3 letters indicating a limited liability corporation. I pulled the state registry data for the entity. The registered agent was listed under a post office box, but the digital footprint left a breadcrumb trail. The email domain used to register the business was tied to a personal Internet Protocol address. I ran a reverse search on the address. The screen blinked, refreshing the data. The name Brittany flashed in bold black text against the white background. My heart pounded a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Nathan was not just taking her to expensive dinners or buying her jewelry. He had set her up as a phantom vendor. He was routing family funds directly from his timber company into her personal accounts under the guise of corporate consulting fees. He was using the money we had built together to finance the mistress he intended to replace me with. The betrayal mutated, shifting from a marital grievance into a calculated financial crime. He was embezzling from his own legacy to fund his secret life. A cold thrill ran down my spine. Nathan thought he was the smartest man in Mississippi. He thought he could outmaneuver me in the dark. But he had just handed me the digital thread that would unravel his entire existence. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the glowing monitors. I reached for my encrypted external drive and plugged it into the secure port. I began downloading every invoice, every wire transfer, and every fraudulent tax document. He wanted to take everything. I was going to ensure he left with nothing. The pale glow of my dual monitors was the only light in the house as the digital transfer bar crawled toward completion. The encrypted external drive hummed a steady, low vibration against the oak grain of my desk. I watched the financial history of my marriage drain from the cloud into a secure, untraceable vault. My eyes burned from staring at the illuminated screens, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins kept fatigue at bay. The digital breadcrumbs I followed painted a vivid, indisputable picture. Nathan had been meticulously siphoning capital from our joint savings to finance Brittany and her expensive tastes. He used dummy vendor accounts tied directly to his regional timber export business, creating a labyrinth of fake invoices for logistics services that were never rendered. The sun began to crest over the Mississippi Delta, casting long morning shadows through the pine forests surrounding our property. Footsteps sounded on the hardwood floor of the hallway. I swiftly minimized the transfer window and pulled up a legitimate supply chain spreadsheet from my logistics firm. The heavy office door pushed open. Nathan stood in the doorway, wearing expensive silk pajamas, holding a mug of dark roast coffee. He looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and rehearsed concern. "You are up early," he noted, his eyes darting to the complex columns of shipping routes on my screen. I kept my gaze fixed on the monitor, typing a random string of numbers. "We lost a major agricultural shipment in transit last night. I have been tracking freight manifests since 4 a.m. to locate the missing cargo." Nathan sighed, stepping into the room and resting a hand on my shoulder. His touch felt like a physical weight. "You work too hard, Kelsey. You are letting this logistics job consume your entire life. You need to step back before the stress makes you sick." His feigned empathy was a chilling performance. I offered a tired nod, allowing him to believe his patronizing advice was received. He kissed the top of my head and walked out to prepare for his day, leaving behind the faint, lingering scent of his cedar cologne. The psychological warfare escalated later that week. We sat across from each other at the mahogany dining table. The ceiling fan churned the thick, humid evening air. I decided to test his defenses, probing the perimeter of his lies. I casually mentioned a discrepancy I noticed in our joint checking account, inquiring about a missing digital statement from the previous month. Nathan stopped chewing his steak. He set his silver fork down with a sharp metallic clink that echoed in the quiet room. His charm vanished, instantly replaced by a cold, patronizing stare. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and folded his hands. He deployed a tactic designed to destabilize my reality. "Kelsey, you are obsessing over nothing," he stated, his voice dropping to a low, soothing pitch that felt incredibly dangerous. "I filed that bank statement weeks ago. I showed it to you in the kitchen. Do you not remember?" I kept my expression neutral. "I have no memory of looking at a statement, Nathan. The balance seems unusually low for this quarter." He let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, shaking his head with manufactured pity. "You spend 10 hours a day hunting for shipping errors and missing cargo. You are bringing that paranoia into our home. Your memory is slipping because your brain is overloaded with spreadsheets. You are seeing problems where none exist. You are letting your stress fracture your grip on reality. He was trying to convince me my own mind was failing. It is a terrifying strategy utilized by men who need to hide their tracks in plain sight. They make the victim doubt their own perception until the truth becomes a blur. I looked at his steady, unblinking eyes. I realized the only way to survive this manipulation was to lean into the narrative he was writing. I let my shoulders slump forward. I forced my hands to tremble slightly as I reached for my glass of iced tea. I looked down at the condensation pooling on the mahogany table, playing the role of the exhausted, overwhelmed wife perfectly. "Maybe you are right, Nathan," I whispered, letting my voice crack with fabricated vulnerability. "The supply chain audits have been grueling lately. I just feel so scattered all the time. I cannot seem to keep my thoughts straight." A triumphant, predatory smile spread across his face. He reached across the table and patted my trembling hand. "It is okay, sweetheart. You just need to rest. Let me handle the finances from now on. You focus on getting your mental health back on track." I nodded, blinking back a forced tear. I surrendered the conversation, giving him the illusion of total control. He felt invincible. He felt like the masterful puppeteer pulling the strings of a fragile, broken woman. He had no idea I spent the previous night bypassing his crude passwords and downloading his entire phantom ledger onto a drive currently hidden beneath the floorboards of my office. A new vulnerability in his armor presented itself the following Saturday. The humid afternoon air hung heavy as I walked down the long gravel driveway to collect the mail. The cicadas buzzed a relentless warning from the canopy of the loblolly pines. Nathan usually handled the incoming mail, sorting it before I returned from the logistics firm. Today, a delayed timber shipment kept him at the export office, giving me unfettered access to the steel mailbox. Among the glossy catalogs and local advertisements, I found a stark white envelope bearing the official seal of the county tax assessor. I broke the seal and pulled out the thick cardstock. It was a formal notice of delinquency. The property taxes on our sprawling pine forest estate had gone unpaid for 2 consecutive quarters. Penalties and interest were stacking rapidly, threatening severe municipal action. My analytical mind processed the strategy instantly. This was not an administrative oversight. Nathan was a numbers man. He understood deadlines and local tax codes better than anyone in his firm. He intentionally stopped paying the property taxes to artificially devalue our shared estate. It is a calculated, hostile divorce tactic. When he eventually filed the papers, the encumbered property would appear as a massive financial liability rather than a lucrative asset. A judge, seeing the delinquent taxes and impending municipal liens, would likely force a distress settlement. It would allow Nathan to buy out my half of the estate for pennies while claiming financial hardship. He was systematically starving the marital assets, preparing to leave me with a hollow shell. I carefully photographed the tax notice with my phone and placed the envelope back into the stack of mail exactly as I found it. I handed him the upper hand on a silver platter, letting him believe his secret trap was perfectly concealed. I returned to my secure workstation, locking the door behind me. The air conditioning hummed, battling the oppressive delta heat outside the window. I opened the encrypted drive and cross-referenced the delinquent tax sums with the phantom ledger I downloaded earlier. The math did not align. As a supply chain auditor, I rely on the fundamental law of equilibrium. Capital out must equal capital in. The money Nathan drained from our joint accounts and the withheld property taxes were substantial sums, but they were not nearly enough to cover the sheer volume of cash flowing into Brittany and her dummy vendor accounts. She was driving a luxury imported vehicle. She was staying in premium suites at coastal resorts on the weekends. The capital required to sustain her elevated lifestyle far exceeded his executive salary and our drained savings combined. The ledger was bleeding from an external artery. I traced the routing numbers on the fake logistics invoices Nathan approved. The funds were not originating from his personal wealth. The capital was flowing directly from the primary operational accounts of the Regional Timber Export Company. The realization hit me with the force of a falling pine. Nathan was not just cheating on his wife and starving our marital assets. He was actively stealing from his own bloodline. The dummy vendor invoices were bleeding his parents dry. He was a corporate embezzler, siphoning family funds to play the wealthy benefactor for a junior executive. The scope of his treason extended far beyond our marriage. He was hollowing out the legacy his father had spent a lifetime building, brick by brick. The rot was systemic. I needed to see exactly how deep the infection went. I opened a new search terminal, preparing to dig directly into the corporate structure of the Kelly family empire. The oppressive humidity of the Mississippi afternoon hung thick in the air as we pulled through the wrought iron gates of the Kelly family estate. Generations of timber wealth had built the sprawling colonial structure sitting at the end of the long driveway. Towering white pillars supported a wraparound porch shaded by ancient weeping willows and thick magnolia trees. It was a monument to old money and carefully curated appearances. Sunday dinner at this house was a mandatory ritual. I stepped out of the luxury sedan, smoothing the fabric of my modest linen dress. The scent of roasted pecans and slow-cooked brisket drifted through the heavy air, but my stomach churned with cold anticipation. I knew I was walking onto a hostile battlefield. Loretta, my mother-in-law, waited on the front steps. She wore a pristine tailored blouse, and her silver hair was styled into an immaculate, unyielding shape. Beside her stood Tara, her oldest daughter, whose sharp features and calculating eyes mirrored her mother perfectly. Neither woman stepped forward to offer a welcoming embrace. Nathan bounded up the stairs, kissing his mother on the cheek and wrapping his arm around his sister. I followed a few paces behind, pasting a polite, fragile smile across my face. "You look tired," Kelsey Loretta observed. Her tone dripped with that specific brand of Southern hospitality, designed to wound a person disguised as genuine concern. "The dark circles under your eyes are quite prominent today. You really must stop letting that logistics job drain the vitality right out of you." I lowered my gaze, allowing my shoulders to slump a fraction of an inch. "Thank you for noticing, Loretta. It has been a very demanding week tracking freight delays." Tara let out a soft, mocking laugh. She adjusted the heavy diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. "Well, a proper Southern wife knows her primary duty is tending to her husband and her home. Spreadsheets and shipping manifests are hardly a substitute for a well-kept marriage." They ushered us into the grand dining room. The long mahogany table was set with heirloom silver and delicate floral china. Judson, my father-in-law, sat at the head of the table, pouring himself a glass of expensive bourbon. He offered a gruff nod of acknowledgement before launching into a booming conversation with Nathan about export tariffs. The true warfare began once the plates were filled. The clinking of silver against porcelain provided a steady rhythm to the psychological execution. Loretta orchestrated the conversation, steering it away from safe topics and guiding it deliberately toward the timber company. "Nathan tells us you hired a new junior executive to manage the coastal logistics," Loretta said, cutting a small piece of brisket. "What was her name again?" "The young, vibrant girl who just secured that new export contract." Nathan beamed, a proud, arrogant glow radiating from his face. "Brittany. She is phenomenal, Mother. A real breath of fresh air in the office." Tara took a slow sip of her sweet tea, locking her sharp eyes directly onto mine. "I met her for lunch on Tuesday," Tara purred. "Brittany is just delightful. She possesses such incredible ambition. She told me she sees a very bright future for herself within this family business. It is so refreshing to see a woman who knows exactly how to please the men around her." The silence that followed was deafening. The buttery roll in my mouth turned to ash. I looked around the opulent dining room, processing the devastating reality. They knew. Loretta and Tara were not just ignorant bystanders. They were fully aware of the affair, and they were actively harboring the mistress. They had welcomed Brittany into their elite circle, sharing lunches and offering their tacit approval. They viewed me as an expendable outsider, a temporary placeholder who failed to conform to their rigid aristocratic standards. They were helping Nathan replace me, just as my own in-laws had likely done to other women in their privileged history. A lesser woman would have dropped her fork, stood up, and screamed. A civilian would have demanded respect and stormed out of the house, tearing their false dignity to shreds. But I am an auditor. I recognize when an opponent reveals their strategic formation. I swallowed my pride, weaponizing my silence. I forced my hands to tremble visibly as I reached for my water glass. I let a sudden look of profound hurt wash over my features, letting my lower lip quiver just a fraction. I ducked my head, staring at my lap, the very picture of a broken, humiliated wife who lacked the strength to defend herself. Loretta exchanged a smug, satisfied glance with Tara. They thrived on my perceived weakness. My submission fueled their towering superiority complex. They believed they had successfully crushed my spirit, paving a frictionless path for Brittany to step into my shoes. After dessert, the men retreated to the wraparound porch to smoke cigars and discuss regional politics. I excused myself, offering a fabricated story about a mild headache. I stepped into the cool, dim hallway, admiring a collection of antique maps framed against the silk wallpaper. A heavy footstep sounded behind me. I turned to find Clayton leaning against the doorframe. Nathan's younger brother ran a struggling subsidiary transport division under the family umbrella. Clayton inherited the Kelly arrogance but severely lacked the intelligence required to sustain it. He smelled cheap bourbon and raw opportunism. Kelsey. He started, his voice low and conspiratorial. Mother is right, you know. You look like you are about to shatter into a million pieces. This marriage is clearly taking a massive toll on your health. I crossed my arms, shrinking back against the wall. It is just stress, Clayton. The agricultural shipping accounts require constant monitoring. Clayton took a step closer, invading my personal space. He smiled, sensing my impending exit from the family hierarchy. You know I could lighten your load. My transport division is looking to expand into agricultural logistics. Since you are struggling to keep your head above water, why do you not share your confidential client lists with me? I can take those heavy contracts off your plate. It would be a favor to you, really. His greed was breathtaking. He believed I was a destitute, soon-to-be-discarded wife, desperate for any lifeline. He wanted to poach my most lucrative clients, assuming I was too mentally fragile to protect my own professional assets. I looked up at him, widening my eyes in feigned gratitude. That is very kind of you, Clayton. I am struggling to manage the volume right now. I will email you a secure spreadsheet of potential contacts on Monday morning. A predatory grin stretched across his face. He patted my shoulder, treating me like a naive child. Good girl. You just focus on resting. I watched him strut away to join the men on the porch. The trembling in my hands vanished instantly. I was indeed going to send Clayton a client list. I mentally prepared a file containing outdated bankrupt and highly litigious vendor contacts. I would provide him with toxic data guaranteed to trigger severe regulatory audits if he attempted to solicit their business. He wanted to steal my livelihood. I was going to hand him a ticking time bomb. The drive home was suffocatingly quiet. Nathan hummed a cheerful tune, tapping his fingers against the steering wheel. He felt victorious. His family had successfully demoralized his wife, and his mistress was eagerly waiting in the wings. We pulled into our dark driveway and stepped out into the humid night air. I unlocked the heavy front door, pushing it open. I reached for the light switch, illuminating the grand entryway. I stopped dead in my tracks. The air in my lungs turned to ice. The physical space of my home had been deliberately altered. I stared at the pale gray wall of the main hallway. My favorite piece of artwork, a beautiful vintage oil painting of the Mississippi River, was missing. The brass hook remained driven into the drywall. A faint rectangular shadow on the paint marked the exact spot where the heavy wooden frame had hung for 5 years. Nathan stepped up behind me, closing the door. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, casually loosening his silk tie. He followed my gaze to the empty wall. "What are you looking at, Kelsey?" he asked, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of innocence. "The painting," I whispered, pointing a shaking finger at the blank space. "The river landscape. It is gone. Where did it go?" Nathan tilted his head, furrowing his brow in a masterful display of manufactured confusion. "What painting are you talking about?" "The one that has hung right there since we bought this house, Nathan." He let out a slow, patronizing sigh. He reached out and rested his heavy hands on my shoulders, turning me to face him. "Kelsey, that painting has been gone for weeks. We moved it to the guest bedroom a month ago because you said the frame was collecting dust. Do you seriously not remember that?" I stared into his dark, unblinking eyes. He was lying. I had dusted that exact frame yesterday morning. He removed the artwork today while I was running errands, moving it specifically to disorient me. It was a calculated psychological tactic designed to fracture my spatial memory and push me closer to a nervous breakdown. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I let my eyes dart wildly around the hallway, acting terrified by my own supposed memory loss. I pressed the palms of my hands against my temples, backing away from him. "I do not remember," I choked out, letting a single tear spill over my eyelashes. "I swear it was there yesterday. I think something is really wrong with my head, Nathan." He smiled, a cold, triumphant expression settling over his features. "You are just overworked, sweetheart. Go upstairs and get some rest. I will handle everything down here." I turned and fled up the grand staircase, playing the role of the shattered, hysterical woman. I locked the door to the master bathroom, leaning against the cold tile. I wiped the single tear from my cheek. My breathing slowed, returning to a steady, calculated rhythm. The psychological warfare was reaching a critical threshold. He wanted me to believe I was losing my mind. But the truth was buried beneath the floorboards, and I knew exactly where I needed to search next to uncover the final piece of his fraudulent empire. The dense canopy of the Mississippi pine forest swallowed the midday sun, casting long, fractured shadows across the desolate gravel road. I drove my modest sedan deep into the heart of the Kelly family timber acreage, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pale. This isolated stretch of wilderness housed their luxury hunting cabin. It was a rustic fortress built 3 generations ago, a place where the Kelly men traditionally retreated to drink expensive bourbon and solidify handshake deals, away from the prying eyes of the Delta Society. Today, it served an entirely different purpose. It was the physical epicenter of my husband's secret life. I parked a quarter-mile down a hidden service trail, killing the engine. The crushing humidity rolled through the open window, carrying the sharp scent of pine needles and damp earth. I walked the remaining distance on foot, stepping carefully over exposed roots to avoid leaving fresh tire tracks near the main property. The cabin loomed ahead, an imposing structure of dark-stained logs and expansive glass windows reflecting the surrounding woods. Nathan thought I was attending a mandatory supply chain seminar downtown. He believed his psychological tactics were working, that I was too fractured and exhausted to question his whereabouts. He felt secure. I retrieved the spare brass key from the hidden magnetic lockbox under the back porch stairs. The heavy wooden door creaked open, revealing the cavernous main living area. The familiar scent of aged leather and wood smoke was gone. It had been replaced by a cloying, unmistakable odor. That synthetic vanilla fragrance assaulted my senses, hanging thick in the stagnant indoor air. I walked slowly toward the master bedroom, my flat soles making zero noise against the polished hardwood floors. The door was wide open. I stepped over the threshold, and the physical reality of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Brittany had not just visited this cabin. She had colonized it. The rustic oak wardrobe doors stood ajar, displaying a curated collection of designer clothing. Silk dresses, high-end riding boots, and premium linen blouses hung neatly in a row. I recognized the brands from the fraudulent invoices I had downloaded 2 nights ago. The logistics consulting fees Nathan funneled from his timber export firm paid for every single stitch of fabric in that closet. I turned toward the ensuite bathroom. A matching set of expensive cosmetics crowded the vanity. 2 plush white towels hung on the rack, bearing freshly embroidered monograms featuring her initials, styled in a presumptuous, elegant script. A profound, blinding heat flared in my chest. The urge to destroy surged through my veins. My eyes darted to a heavy iron fireplace poker resting near the hearth. It would take less than 5 minutes to shatter the glass vanity mirror, shred the designer silk dresses, and drag her imported cosmetics across the pristine hardwood. I wanted to tear the sanctuary apart, to leave a visceral, undeniable message that her stolen kingdom was burning. My fingers twitched, inching toward the iron handle. Then the forensic auditor took over. Emotion is a liability. Destruction is loud and leaves undeniable evidence of the perpetrator. A broken mirror is a tantrum. A seized asset is an execution. I forced my hands to relax, uncurling my fingers one by one. I took a slow, measured breath, drawing the cool air into my lungs. I was not here to break glass. I was here to break his empire. I turned my back on the vanity and scanned the master bedroom. Nathan was a creature of intense habit. He craved control and despised modern digital banking for his most sensitive transactions, preferring hard copies he could physically lock away. During our first year of marriage, he bragged after a few glasses of scotch about a hidden floor safe his grandfather installed beneath the cabin floorboards, designed to hold emergency cash and sensitive corporate deeds. I knelt on the plush, woven rug, analyzing the geometric patterns of the floor. Near the heavy oak bed frame, a single wide plank appeared marginally cleaner than the surrounding wood, lacking the microscopic layer of dust that settles in undisturbed corners. I slid my fingernails into the narrow groove, prying upward. The board popped loose with a soft click. Beneath it lay a crude analog dial safe set deep into the foundation. It was an older model, heavy steel, lacking any biometric upgrades. Nathan always mocked complex security measures, viewing them as unnecessary hurdles for a man of his intellect. He relied on predictable numerical anchors. I spun the cold metal dial, testing his favorite combinations. I started with his birth year. Nothing. I tried the founding date of his export firm. The lock remained unyielding. I paused, resting my forehead against the cool wood. I needed to think like a narcissist. What date mattered most to a man obsessed with his own superior legacy? I twisted the dial to the date his father officially promoted him to vice president. The heavy internal tumblers clicked satisfyingly into place. The steel door swung open with a faint groan. I reached into the dark cavity, expecting to find stacks of emergency currency or illicit vendor contracts tying him further to Brittany. Instead, my fingers brushed against a thick stack of legal parchment secured by a heavy rubber band. I pulled the documents into the light, filtering through the pine branches outside the window. The header on the first page bore the insignia of a private equity syndicate located 3 states away. It was a shadow lending firm notorious for predatory practices, operating far outside the bounds of traditional banking regulations. I scanned the first paragraph, my eyes tracing the dense financial terminology. My breath caught in my throat. This was not an investment portfolio. It was a toxic mezzanine loan agreement. 8 months ago, Nathan had borrowed $5 million from this shadow syndicate. The interest rates outlined in the margins were astronomical, structured to compound at a punishing monthly interval. It was a desperation move, a financial Hail Mary thrown by a man drowning in corporate debt. I flipped to the third page, dissecting the capital distribution. The Kelly timber export business was not the booming legacy he paraded at high society galas. The international tariffs and a series of failed logistical gambles had hollowed out the operation. Nathan was entirely bankrupt. His polished shoes, his custom suits, the charity donations — it was all a meticulously painted facade covering a terrifying financial crater. He had orchestrated the dummy vendor accounts and the fake logistics invoices, not just to buy Britney's silk dresses, but to siphon the last remaining drops of liquidity from a dying company before it imploded. He was looting the ship as it sank. But the final page held the most devastating revelation. I stared at the collateral annex, the section detailing the assets pledged to secure the $5 million loan. Shadow lenders do not offer unsecured capital to failing executives. They demand blood. The primary asset listed on the ledger was the sprawling colonial estate belonging to his parents, Judson and Loretta. Nathan had quietly leveraged his own family home, pledging his parents' generational wealth to secure his toxic debt. He forged the necessary corporate resolutions using his authority as vice president to cross-collateralize the timber firm against their private residents. The people who froze me out at Sunday dinner, the women who mocked my career and welcomed his mistress, were sleeping under a roof that legally belonged to a predatory lending syndicate. The sheer poetry of his betrayal was staggering. He had doomed everyone who loved him. I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket and opened the high-resolution scanner application. I did not rush. I smoothed every single page flat against the floorboards, photographing the interest schedules, the default clauses, and the forged collateral signatures. I captured every undeniable piece of evidence, verifying the digital copies were legible and securely backed up to my offshore server. When the final page was documented, I stacked the parchment exactly as I found it, replacing the heavy rubber band. I set the bundle back inside the steel cavity, closed the safe door, and spun the dial to scramble the tumblers. I fitted the floorboard perfectly into place and smoothed the woven rug over the hidden seam. I stood up, giving the bedroom one final sweeping glance. The designer clothes remained untouched. The monogrammed towels hung perfectly on their rack. I left the sanctuary of his deception entirely undisturbed, an invisible ghost walking out the front door. I locked the cabin, returning the brass key to the magnetic box beneath the stairs. The suffocating heat of the Mississippi afternoon pressed against my skin as I hiked back to my hidden sedan. I slid into the driver's seat, starting the engine. The air conditioning roared to life, blasting cold air against my flushed face. My phone vibrated in the cup holder. The screen illuminated, displaying a new text message from Nathan. "The logistics firm is dealing with a severe supply chain bottleneck," he wrote, his tone projecting the image of a dedicated, hard-working executive. "I am going to be stuck at the export office very late tonight, Kelsey. Please do not wait up for me. Get some rest." I stared at the glowing text, a cold smile curving my lips. I knew exactly where he was heading tonight. He was not going to the office. He was driving straight to this pine forest cabin to drink expensive bourbon with his junior executive, ignoring the $5 million guillotine swinging inches above his head. He thought he was outsmarting a paranoid, broken wife. He had no idea his primary secured creditor was pulling out of the woods, ready to accelerate the collapse of his entire world. I shifted the car into gear, steering back toward the highway to prepare for the legal ambush. The morning sun filtered through the wooden plantation shutters, casting horizontal stripes of bright light across the granite kitchen island. The oppressive Mississippi humidity was already building outside, but the interior of the house remained chilled by the relentless hum of the central air conditioning. I stood near the espresso machine, letting the scent of dark French roast ground me. Nathan strode into the kitchen wearing a pristine navy suit. His silk tie was perfectly knotted, his hair flawlessly styled, yet a sharp tension gripped the corners of his eyes. His movements were slightly too rigid, his energy buzzing with a frantic, suppressed urgency. He set his expensive leather briefcase on a bar stool and pulled a thick manila folder from its main compartment. He slid the heavy envelope across the polished stone surface. His voice carried a practiced, casual cadence designed to project unbothered routine. "My accountant bundled some standard tax filing documents for your logistics business, along with my timber export paperwork," he announced, pouring himself a cup of coffee without meeting my gaze. "It saves us the double processing fees with the municipal clerk. I just need your signature on the last page before I head to the office." He tapped a silver pen against the granite, offering it to me with a reassuring smile. I picked up the pen. He thought he was dealing with a shattered woman. He believed his weeks of gaslighting had successfully eroded my cognitive functions, leaving me too exhausted to question his motives. I opened the folder and pulled out the thick stack of premium bond paper. My eyes scanned the paragraphs, bypassing the standard boilerplate text. A trained supply chain auditor does not read words on a page. An auditor scans for structural anomalies and hidden clauses. Page 1 appeared standard. Page 2 contained routine tax declarations. I flipped deeper into the stack, maintaining a blank, vacant expression on my face. Page 12 revealed the snare. It was buried under a highly misleading header regarding marital tax indemnification. The clauses were incredibly dense, filled with heavy legal jargon designed to exhaust a casual reader and force them to skip directly to the signature line. But the malicious intent was glaringly obvious to a forensic eye. It was a formal addendum engineered to bypass the ironclad prenuptial agreement we signed 8 years ago. When Nathan proposed, I demanded a strict financial partition. I built my logistics career from the ground up, generating a formidable independent portfolio long before I met him. My wealth is stored in secure, untraceable offshore accounts, entirely insulated from his family legacy. He mocked the prenup back then, claiming his vast timber fortune made my savings look like pocket change. Now facing a catastrophic default on his shadow loan, my protected assets were his only remaining lifeline. The convoluted legal text on page 12 was a backdoor mechanism granting him equity in my independent accounts to satisfy his impending creditor demands. He was trying to steal my money, to pay for the toxic debt he accrued funding his mistress. If I simply refused to sign, I would break character. I would reveal that my mind remained sharp and that I saw the trap. If I confronted him directly, he would deny the intent, shred the document, and draft a stealthier version. I needed to destroy the physical contract while maintaining the flawless illusion of my own incompetence. I held the silver pen over the signature line, letting my hand hover above the paper. I reached for my ceramic coffee mug with my left hand. I calculated the exact angle of the rim relative to the manila folder resting on the granite. I feigned a sudden, intense muscle spasm, mimicking a symptom of the profound exhaustion he convinced me I suffered from. My wrist twisted sharply. The heavy mug tipped over, striking the countertop with a loud clatter. A tidal wave of scalding dark roast washed across the documents. The hot liquid hit the crucial signature page directly. The dense, black ink instantly blurred, bleeding across the premium paper. The carefully drafted legal trap turned into an illegible, soggy ruin in a matter of seconds. I gasped, jumping back as the dark coffee dripped over the edge of the island onto the hardwood floor. "Oh no," I cried out, bringing my hands to my mouth in shock. "Nathan, I am so clumsy. I am so sorry." His reaction was immediate and terrifying. A confident husband dealing with a ruined routine tax form might sigh or roll his eyes in mild irritation. Nathan erupted. The polished executive mask shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He slammed his fist against the granite island, striking the stone with enough force to rattle the espresso cups on the shelf. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted kitchen ceiling. He snatched a handful of paper towels and scrubbed frantically at the ruined document, desperately trying to salvage the signature line. The wet paper tore under his frantic pressure, dissolving into useless brown pulp. He ripped the destroyed page from the stack, throwing it into the sink with a feral grunt of frustration. His chest heaved. He glared at me, his eyes wide with genuine, unrestrained panic. His creditors were circling. The private equity syndicate did not grant extensions. He needed access to my offshore capital today, and I had just drowned his only exit strategy in French roast. I shrank against the refrigerator, pulling my arms tight against my chest. I forced my shoulders to shake, letting rapid, shallow breaths hitch in my throat. I looked at him with wide, terrified eyes, letting hot tears pool on my lower lashes. "I am just so tired," I whimpered, burying my face in my trembling hands. "My mind is so foggy from all the shipping manifests and cargo delays. I cannot even hold a cup properly anymore." "Please do not yell at me. I will sign a fresh copy tonight. Just print another one at your office, and I promise I will sign it the second you get home." He stared at me, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack his teeth. His rapid breathing slowed as his calculating mind took over. He realized shouting at a broken, weeping woman would not expedite the legal paperwork. He needed my willing compliance. He forced a rigid, unnatural breath, smoothing the lapels of his suit jacket to regain a fraction of his corporate composure. "Fine," he spat out, his tone dripping with acidic contempt. "I will have the legal department draft a new batch. Do not touch anything else today, Kelsey. Just sit here and try not to ruin anything else." He grabbed his leather briefcase and stormed out of the kitchen. The heavy front door slammed shut, rattling the window panes in their frames. The powerful engine of his luxury sedan roared to life outside. I listened to his tires spin on the gravel driveway as he sped away toward his failing timber export firm. I stood alone in the quiet kitchen. The tears evaporated from my eyes in an instant. The trembling in my shoulders stopped, replaced by a cold, steady calm. I reached for a fresh towel and wiped the remaining coffee off the granite counter, moving with precise, unhurried grace. His disproportionate rage confirmed my timeline. The toxic mezzanine loan I discovered hidden under the pine forest cabin floorboards was nearing its critical acceleration date. He was cornered, lashing out like a trapped predator. It was time to close the perimeter and lock the gate. I walked into my secure home office and locked the heavy oak door. I retrieved my encrypted mobile device, a secondary phone entirely untethered to the family data plan. I opened my contacts and dialed a Chicago area code. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Mitchell and Associates." Mitchell was my proxy attorney. He operated in the ruthless, fast-paced world of distressed corporate debt, far removed from the polite old money circles of the Mississippi Delta. He asked 0 questions regarding my personal life, focusing solely on executing financial directives with surgical precision. "Mitchell," I said, keeping my voice level and commanding, "I am sending you a secure, encrypted file containing the collateral annex and contract details for a shadow loan held by a private equity syndicate. The debtor is the Kelly Timber Export Firm. Received." Mitchell confirmed, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the secure line. "What is the operational objective?" "The syndicate is holding a highly volatile note," I explained, staring out the window at the swaying loblolly pines. "The debtor is functionally insolvent, though the regional market remains unaware of the deficit. The shadow lenders will want a quiet, fast exit before the default becomes public knowledge and triggers a panic. I want you to initiate an immediate purchase of that toxic debt. They will demand a premium," Mitchell warned, his tone shifting into negotiation mode. "Offer them a highly favorable cash buyout," I instructed, pulling up my offshore account balances on the dual monitors. "Use the capital from my holding company to facilitate the transfer. I want to own the entire debt portfolio, including the collateral liens on the residential properties. I need to be the primary secured creditor by the end of the business week." "Consider it done," Mitchell replied, the thrill of a hostile acquisition coloring his voice. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the desk. Nathan tried to forge his way into my financial sanctuary to save his sinking ship. He believed I was a blind, stumbling liability. He had no idea his desperate legal trap just handed me the exact coordinates to buy the ocean out from under him. The frosted glass door of my downtown logistics office muted the frantic energy of the supply chain floor outside. I sat behind my polished mahogany desk, reviewing the morning freight manifests. The air smelled faintly of fresh printer ink and the dark roast coffee cooling in my ceramic mug. My focus was interrupted by the sharp chime of my private direct line. The caller identification displayed Delta Harvest Enterprises. Garrett Henderson was the founder of Delta Harvest. He was a self-made agricultural tycoon who built a regional shipping empire from a single tractor. Garrett despised inherited wealth and possessed a lethal instinct for detecting corporate incompetence. He was also my most lucrative client, a man who trusted my logistical modeling more than he trusted his own board of directors. I picked up the receiver, holding it to my ear. "Good morning, Garrett. I assume the coastal shipping containers cleared customs on schedule." A heavy sigh echoed over the line. "The coastal containers are fine, Kelsey. I am calling about a different kind of excess baggage. Your brother-in-law just walked out of my conference room." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, letting a genuine smile touch my lips. Clayton always lived in the shadow of his older brother, managing the decaying transport subsidiary of the Kelly family empire. Clayton lacked Nathan's refined charm, but possessed double the unearned entitlement. He viewed my impending exit from the family as an opportunity to scavenge my professional territory. "Is Clayton expanding his transport routes?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "He pitched me a cut-rate timber shipping contract," Garrett grumbled, the irritation clear in his gravelly voice. "He claimed his firm could undercut your current operational costs by 20%. To prove it, he handed me a digital routing matrix." Garrett paused, the sound of shuffling paper transmitting through the receiver. "Kelsey, the matrix he provided looked remarkably similar to your proprietary data structures. However, it was full of dead logistical zones and bankrupt freight vendors. If I routed my harvest through those channels, my entire coastal yield would rot on the loading docks." The trap I set during Sunday dinner had sprung with perfect precision. I provided Clayton with a poisoned spreadsheet, banking on his greed overriding any standard due diligence. He tried to poach a seasoned tycoon using toxic data. I took a slow sip of my coffee, analyzing the strategic opening. Garrett was fishing for an explanation. He knew the Kelly family dynamic and he sensed a fracture. Garrett, I cannot speak to the internal auditing practices over at Clayton's division, I said, my voice dropping into a measured, professional cadence. However, I value our working relationship immensely. As a precaution, I would advise careful consideration before entering into any long-term financial commitments with the Kelly Transport Network. The entire timber export division is currently navigating some severe logistical instabilities. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for 3 seconds. In the high-stakes world of agricultural logistics, severe instability was corporate code for impending insolvency. Garrett understood the subtext instantly. I was warning him that the Kelly empire was structurally unsound without making a single actionable accusation. I appreciate the candid insight, Kelsey Garrett finally replied, his tone shifting to one of profound gratitude. I will instruct my procurement team to sever all pending contract negotiations with Clayton immediately. We stick with your routing models. I ended the call, setting the receiver down gently. Clayton thought he was a cunning predator stealing scraps from a weakened woman. Instead, he just burned his only remaining bridge to the most profitable agricultural network in the Delta. The Kelly family transport subsidiary was now silently, permanently blacklisted. Before I could return to my manifests, my personal cell phone vibrated against the mahogany desk. The screen illuminated, displaying a familiar contact name, Nathan Mobile. It was unusual for my husband to call during peak trading hours. I tapped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, letting out a soft, fabricated sigh to maintain the illusion of my exhaustion. "Hello, Nathan," I answered softly. "Oh, goodness, Kelsey. I'm so sorry." A high-pitched, breathless voice replied. It was not Nathan. It was Brittany. The junior executive spoke with a rehearsed, forced innocence. She was executing a classic territorial maneuver. Calling the wife from the husband's personal device was a calculated boundary violation designed to humiliate and assert dominance. She wanted me to know exactly how close she was to the man I married. "I meant to dial the catering company for the afternoon board meeting," Brittany continued, her tone dripping with fake apology. "Nathan left his phone on my desk while he went into the conference room. I must have pressed the wrong speed dial contact." I reached forward and pressed the digital recording button on my secure workstation, linking it to the cellular audio feed. I needed to document every syllable of this interaction. "It is no trouble at all, Brittany," I replied, injecting my voice with chilling politeness. "I know how frantic the corporate office can get on a Tuesday morning. You must be swamped with export files." "Oh, just buried in paperwork," she laughed, a light, airy sound that grated against the ear. "We are working incredibly hard to keep the timber accounts balanced." I listened closely to the audio transmission filtering out her voice to focus on the ambient environment. The background noise did not match a bustling corporate office. There was no hum of copy machines, no ringing desk phones, no muffled boardroom chatter. Instead, I heard the unmistakable rhythmic splashing of water, followed by the low mechanical drone of a pedicure basin jet. Faint instrumental spa music drifted beneath the bubbling sound. Brittany was not at the office balancing timber accounts. She was sitting in a luxury day spa during peak business hours, enjoying a premium pedicure while collecting a corporate salary. "I hope you find the catering number, Brittany," I said, keeping my demeanor flawlessly sweet. "Please tell Nathan to call me when he finishes his meeting. Enjoy the rest of your busy workday." I terminated the connection, saving the audio file to my encrypted drive. The recording was a crucial piece of evidence. It proved definitively that Brittany was a phantom employee. She was siphoning corporate wages funded by dummy vendor invoices while providing zero actual labor to the timber firm. When I forwarded my compiled dossier to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, this audio clip would verify her active participation in the tax fraud scheme. She thought she was taunting a defeated rival. She had just provided the federal government with undeniable proof of her own complicity. I leaned back, lacing my fingers together. The women in Nathan's orbit were making catastrophic strategic errors, fueled by their own vanity. An hour later, my secondary encrypted device chimed. The caller identification indicated a secured line from Chicago. I answered instantly. "The acquisition is finalized," Mitchell announced, his voice crisp and devoid of unnecessary pleasantries. I sat forward, my pulse quickening. "Did the Shadow Syndicate accept the terms?" "They took the cash buyout without a second thought," Mitchell confirmed. "The mezzanine loan was heavily distressed, and they wanted the liquidity before the default went public. The digital paperwork cleared 5 minutes ago. The title transfers and the collateral liens are officially registered under your holding company." I stared out the window of my office, looking past the downtown skyline toward the distant, sprawling pine forests. The financial architecture of my revenge was now locked into place. "I own the debt," I stated, seeking verbal confirmation of the reality. "You own the entire portfolio," Mitchell replied, the satisfaction clear in his tone. "You hold the primary lien on the Kelly Timber Export firm. More importantly, you hold the deed of trust for the residential estate currently occupied by his parents. You are the sole secured creditor, Kelsey. You own the very roof over his head." I ended the call feeling a profound sense of equilibrium settle into my bones. Nathan thought he could starve my resources and replace me with a junior executive. He thought he was the architect of my demise. He had no idea he was now merely a tenant living on borrowed time inside an empire I just purchased for pennies on the dollar. The trap was fully armed. It was time to put on a gray sweater, shed a few strategic tears, and push my husband into pulling the trigger. I scrubbed the designer foundation from my skin, watching the tinted water spiral down the porcelain sink. The Mississippi heat usually demanded a flawless presentation, a rigid mask of Southern perfection I had maintained for 8 years. Today, I let the dark circles beneath my eyes take center stage. I abandoned my tailored blouses for a faded, oversized gray sweater, dragging my feet across the hardwood floors of our estate. If Nathan required a shattered, paranoid wife to execute his final maneuver, I would deliver a performance worthy of a silver screen. I isolated myself in the study, staring blankly at the wall whenever he walked past the open door. I needed him bloated with false confidence. I needed him to believe his psychological warfare had broken the very foundation of my mind. One Tuesday evening, I ensured he found me kneeling on the kitchen tiles, weeping over a shattered glass of sweet tea. I let my breath hitch, wrapping my arms around my knees, rocking slightly against the cold stone. He stood over me, his polished leather shoes mere inches from the broken crystal. He did not bend down to offer a hand. He merely sighed, the sound thick with manufactured pity. He played the benevolent warden flawlessly. His gaslighting intensified the following morning. My car keys vanished from the marble entryway console. I spent 20 minutes tearing through the living room, my breathing intentionally ragged, projecting pure panic. Nathan sauntered down the stairs, reached into the pocket of his own trench coat, and held the keys up with a condescending metallic click. He told me I had placed them there during a manic episode. He told me my supply chain job was fracturing my fragile mind. I nodded, whispering an apology, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. Nathan wasted no time weaponizing my fabricated decline. He summoned his mother and sister to observe the wreckage. Loretta and Tara arrived unannounced on a humid Thursday afternoon. The heavy oak front door swung open, and their designer heels clicked sharply against the foyer tiles. They did not bring casseroles or comforting words. They brought empty cardboard boxes. Loretta stood in the center of the parlor, claiming Nathan had informed them of my severe nervous breakdown. She suggested a prolonged stay at a discreet wellness retreat in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place where exhausted, problematic women could fade quietly out of sight. While Loretta delivered her syrupy, venomous monologue, Tara roamed the living room. She picked up a vintage silver tea service I had sourced from a Parisian estate sale, tracing the intricate floral engravings with a manicured fingernail. The clinking of the silver lid echoed in the quiet room, a sharp, invasive sound. Tara casually remarked how beautiful the silver would look in her own formal dining room, treating my home like a liquidation sale. She moved to the mantelpiece, assessing a pair of brass candlesticks, her eyes calculating their auction value. They were inventorying my life right in front of me. They cataloged the mahogany sideboards, the Persian rugs, and the crystal decanters, quietly dividing the spoils of my impending exile. They believed they were entitled to the fruits of my labor simply because I had married into their bloodline. The urge to straighten my spine, command them to leave, and expose their son's impending bankruptcy burned fiercely inside my chest. But ego is the enemy of strategy. I kept my head bowed, my shoulders hunched, staring meekly at my trembling hands. I thanked Loretta for her concern, my voice barely a whisper. My submission fed their towering arrogance. They left an hour later, victorious, leaving the empty cardboard boxes stacked near the staircase as a grim promise of my departure. The moment their luxury SUV disappeared down the pine-lined driveway, the fragile bell died. I locked myself inside my home office, shedding the oversized sweater to reveal a sharp, crisp blouse. The rage I suppressed during their visit channeled directly into my fingertips. I opened the encrypted files provided by Mitchell. I began formatting the legal default notices for the shadow loan. Every keystroke was a calculated strike. I aligned the margins, verified the collateral schedules detailing Loretta's prized colonial estate, and finalized the acceleration demands. They wanted my vintage tea service. I was taking the roof over their heads. I printed the draft, feeling the heavy, satisfying weight of the paper in my hands. The legal snare was perfect. I just needed Nathan to step onto the final trigger plate. That evening, the heavy Delta air pressed against the dining room windows. Nathan sat at the head of the table, slicing into his steak with surgical precision. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up, projecting the image of a man burdened by the weight of a failing spouse. I pushed the food around my plate, staring blankly at the porcelain. Nathan cleared his throat, setting his silver knife down. He leaned forward, adopting a tone of deep, sorrowful responsibility. He told me he could no longer watch the stress destroy my mind. He insisted that the burden of managing our marital finances was contributing to my paranoia. He suggested, with a chillingly soft voice, that I step away from the ledgers entirely. He wanted exclusive control to protect me from myself. He needed to be the sole administrator of our joint accounts. This was the end game he desired. He needed undisputed dominion over the shared financial network to execute his final transfer of stolen funds to Brittany without any lingering oversight. He needed me blind to the final phase of his embezzlement. I looked up at him, allowing my eyes to well with fabricated relief. I whispered that he was right, that I was too exhausted to look at another spreadsheet, and that I trusted him to take the helm. I stood up, walked to the study, and retrieved the two-factor authentication digital tokens linked to our shared financial network. I carried the small plastic devices back into the dining room. The plastic felt cold against my skin, a stark contrast to the boiling heat of my internal resolve. I placed them directly into his waiting palm. His fingers closed around the tokens. a subtle, victorious smirk flashing across his features. He pocketed them immediately, as if terrified I might suddenly change my mind and snatch them back. He thought he had just stripped me of my last remaining defense. He believed he was severing my access to my own wealth, rendering me a financial dependent. He did not realize those accounts were already flagged with the authorities. I had spent the past week configuring a silent backdoor audit trail linking those specific digital tokens directly to the phantom vendor payments flowing into Brittany's accounts. The Internal Revenue Service tracks digital fingerprints. By willingly demanding and accepting exclusive administrative control of those specific portals, Nathan had just legally assumed sole liability for the fraudulent wire transfers. He erased my digital footprint and painted a giant target on his own back. He tied his own hands to a federal tripwire, believing he was putting on a crown. I walked back to my chair and offered him a weak, grateful smile, knowing his financial execution was now set in stone. The ambient hum of the refrigeration units provided a steady rhythm as I navigated the aisles of the premium market downtown. The scent of ripe peaches and fresh-baked sourdough lingered in the cool, conditioned air. I placed a selection of organic produce and a bottle of sparkling water onto the black conveyor belt. The teenage cashier offered a polite smile, scanning the items with practiced efficiency. I swiped my primary debit card through the terminal, anticipating the familiar, approving chime. Instead, the machine emitted a sharp, discordant beep. The small digital screen flashed a glaring red error code reading, "Transaction declined." I frowned, feigning mild confusion. I reached into my leather wallet and retrieved a secondary credit card tied to a different joint account. I inserted the chip. The terminal whirred, processing the data, before rejecting the card with another harsh beep. The cashier shifted uncomfortably, her polite smile faltering as the line of affluent shoppers behind me began to murmur. I apologized, citing a likely bank error, and stepped aside, leaving the groceries on the stainless steel counter. The automatic glass doors parted, bathing me in the stifling Mississippi heat as I walked toward my car. I pulled my smartphone from my purse and opened the primary banking application. My thumb authenticated the login, but the dashboard refused to load. A gray dialog box materialized on the screen stating, "Access suspended pending legal hold." The trap had sprung. The phone vibrated in my palm, displaying Nathan's private office number. I tapped the screen and held the device to my ear. I did not speak, waiting for him to initiate the exchange. The voice that greeted me was devoid of the syrupy, manufactured pity he had utilized for the past month. His tone was clinical, sharp, and frigid. It was the voice of a corporate executive executing a hostile liquidation. "Hello, Kelsey," he began, the false warmth replaced by sheer calculation. "I assume you are currently standing outside a store wondering why your plastic no longer functions." I let out a soft, breathless gasp, allowing him to hear my rising panic. "Nathan, what is happening?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why are the accounts locked?" "Because I filed an emergency ex parte injunction this morning," he stated smoothly. "A county judge reviewed the affidavits provided by my family and my legal counsel. We demonstrated a clear pattern of severe mental instability and erratic behavior on your part. We expressed valid concern that you were an immediate flight risk, harboring intentions to drain the marital estate." The court agreed. He continued, his tone steeped in arrogant victory. "Every shared local asset checking account and credit line is now frozen under my exclusive conservatorship, pending a formal psychiatric evaluation." The brilliance of his strategy was undeniable. He had spent weeks orchestrating scenarios to make me look insane, hiding my keys, documenting my fabricated crying spells, and using his mother to establish a corroborating witness narrative. Now he weaponized that very illusion to financially paralyze me. A subtle chime resonated from my phone, indicating an incoming email. I just sent a document to your personal inbox, Nathan continued. It is a formal petition for divorce, alongside a preliminary settlement offer. I suggest you read it very carefully. It grants you a nominal relocation stipend of $3,000. I am keeping the Pine Forest estate, the timber export equity, and the primary investment portfolios. If you sign it today, I will drop the mandate for your psychiatric hold. I stared through the windshield of my car, analyzing the sheer audacity of his offer. He was attempting to discard me with a sum that barely covered a month of rent in a decent neighborhood. If I refuse, I whispered, injecting my tone with forced desperation. A distinct, airy sound drifted through the receiver. It was a high-pitched giggle, muffled but unmistakable. Brittany was sitting right next to him in his executive office, listening to my supposed destruction on speakerphone. They were celebrating their victory together, treating my ruin as an afternoon entertainment. If you fight me, Kelsey Nathan warned, the cold edge of his voice sharpening, I will drag you through a grueling public trial. I will subpoena your logistics firm. I will call Garrett Henderson and every other major agricultural client you manage to inform them of your severe mental breakdown. I will destroy your professional reputation in the Delta. You will be blacklisted, unemployable, and drowning in legal fees you cannot afford. Take the settlement. Walk away quietly and start over somewhere else. The theater of the moment demanded a spectacular finale. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing my chest to heave. I pulled the phone away from my mouth, slightly hyperventilating into the receiver. The frantic, jagged breaths sounded incredibly convincing. Please, Nathan, I begged, letting a sob tear through my throat. You cannot do this. I have nothing else. My career is all I have left. Where am I supposed to go? How am I supposed to live on $3,000? You promised to protect me. Please, do not leave me with nothing. His laughter was a low, dark rumble vibrating through the speaker. You brought this on yourself, he replied, devoid of a single ounce of empathy. You lost your grip on reality. I am just cleaning up the mess. Have your bags packed by sunset. He severed the connection. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, letting it rest on my lap. The tears evaporated from my lashes. The frantic heaving of my chest ceased instantly, replaced by a deep, controlled inhalation. My facial muscles relaxed, settling into an expression of impenetrable stone. The weeping, broken wife ceased to exist the second the call ended. I reached into the hidden compartment of my center console and retrieved a secondary encrypted smartphone. The device bypassed local cellular networks, routing directly through secured offshore servers. I booted the screen, typing a complex alphanumeric sequence to unlock the financial dashboard. The interface loaded, displaying the accounts Nathan knew nothing about. The screen illuminated a pristine numerical row, revealing a balance of $4,012,500. The independent wealth I accrued analyzing supply chains and optimizing logistics routes remained untouched, heavily insulated by international banking privacy laws. He thought he starved my resources. He believed I was a destitute, frantic woman crying in a grocery store parking lot. He had no idea his emergency injunction was the equivalent of locking a fortress door from the outside while leaving the enemy inside with the armory. I started the car engine, the air conditioning blasting against my skin. I steered the vehicle out of the parking lot, driving back toward the sprawling pine forest estate. The oppressive humidity pressed against the windshield, a physical manifestation of the tension building within the Kelly family. I pulled into the long gravel driveway, parking near the grand front steps. The house felt cavernous and empty, echoing with the impending confrontation. I walked up the sweeping hardwood staircase, entering the master suite. I bypassed the walk-in closet filled with tailored blazers, silk dresses, and expensive jewelry. Those items belonged to a life I was ready to shed. I retrieved a cheap, scuffed suitcase from the back of the storage room. I opened the hollow shell, placing a few plain sweaters, faded denim jeans, and basic necessities inside. The sparse, unbranded clothing reinforced the image of a defeated, destitute victim fleeing with only the bare minimum. A woman fighting for her dignity might refuse to leave, demanding to stay in the home she helped maintain. But a strategic predator understands the value of yielding physical territory to secure a tactical advantage. Nathan and Brittany were desperate to claim the estate, eager to play lord and lady of the manor. By stepping aside and letting them take the house without a struggle, they would boldly assert legal possession of the property. They would rush to occupy the very structure that served as the primary collateral for the ruinous shadow loan I now owned. I zipped the cheap suitcase shut, testing the weight of the flimsy handle. The physical eviction was imminent, and I was ready to hand them the keys to their own prison. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Mississippi Delta, painting the pine forests in deep shades of gold and amber. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, piercing the grand foyer windows. I sat on the bottom step of the sweeping oak staircase, my cheap, scuffed suitcase resting beside my feet. The silence of the sprawling estate felt heavy, thick with the anticipation of an impending invasion. I did not have to wait long. The crunch of tires tearing up the pristine gravel driveway signaled their arrival. A silver luxury SUV halted abruptly near the front portico. Doors slammed shut, echoing through the humid air. I pulled my knees tight against my chest, clutching a plain gray cardigan, arranging my features into a mask of pure, unadulterated defeat. The heavy brass lock tumbled. They did not even bother to knock. Brittany pushed the mahogany door open, stepping over the threshold with the confident strut of a conquering general. She wore a tailored white pantsuit, a stark visual declaration of her victory, accessorized with a silk scarf that likely cost a month of my former assistant's salary. Behind her, moving with a slower, more aristocratic grace, came Loretta. My mother-in-law adjusted her pearl necklace, her sharp eyes scanning the foyer as if inspecting a property she had just acquired at auction. "Look at this space," Brittany announced, her high voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. She dropped her designer handbag onto the antique console table I had painstakingly restored. "It has so much potential once we clear out the dreary, suffocating clutter." Loretta nodded in agreement, running a manicured finger along the edge of a mahogany side table. She examined the non-existent dust on her fingertip with a theatrical sigh. "Nathan always complained about the pedestrian taste defining this house," Loretta murmured, casting a disdainful glance toward the Persian rug. "You simply cannot buy class. A woman raised counting shipping crates will naturally decorate like a warehouse manager. We will need an interior designer to strip this place down to the studs and remove the stench of common labor." I shrank back against the wooden banister, forcing my shoulders to tremble. I let out a soft, fractured breath, drawing their predatory attention. Brittany noticed me cowering on the bottom step, a cruel, triumphant smile stretched across her painted lips. She reached into her tailored blazer and produced a thick, folded document printed on premium legal stock. She stepped forward, waving the paper in the air like a battle standard. "I hope you have your bags packed, Kelsey," Brittany stated, her tone dripping with toxic sweetness. "Because you are officially trespassing on my property." She tossed the document onto the floor near my feet. I stared at the crisp white paper. It was a property deed, freshly drafted and bearing an expedited notary seal. The document transferred the title of the Pine Forest Estate from Nathan's sole administrative holding into a joint tenancy listing Brittany as the primary occupant. It was a masterful piece of forgery and legal manipulation, likely drafted by one of the junior partners at the Kelly family law firm. Nathan was trying to shield the residential asset from the divorce proceedings by gifting it to his mistress before the ink on my settlement offer even dried. "This house belongs to me now," Brittany continued, closing the distance until her pointed leather shoes nearly touched my sneakers. Nathan finalized the transfer this morning. He wants a fresh start. He wants a home filled with life and vibrancy, not a paranoid, exhausted woman dragging him down. He prefers someone who can match his energy. Someone young enough to actually enjoy the wealth he generates. Her words were designed to obliterate my self-esteem, targeting the universal insecurities of a discarded spouse. She wanted me to feel old, irrelevant, and replaced. I reached down with a shaking hand, picking up the forged deed. I let a ragged sob escape my throat, clutching the plain gray cardigan tight against my chest. "Please," I whispered, staring up at them with wide, tear-filled eyes. "You cannot do this today. My accounts are locked. My credit cards are frozen. I have nowhere to go. Just give me one extra day to figure out a hotel or call a coworker. Please, Loretta, you know I poured my heart into this home." Loretta stepped forward, her posture rigid, her expression devoid of a single ounce of empathy. She looked down at me like I was a pest infesting her garden. "You forfeited any right to this home the moment you lost your mind and became a liability to my son," Loretta declared, her voice cold and unforgiving. "You are a flight risk and a danger to the Kelly legacy. Nathan is being incredibly generous by offering you a relocation stipend in the settlement. I suggest you take your cheap little suitcase and walk to the highway. If you are not off this property in 5 minutes, I will call the county sheriff and have you forcibly removed for trespassing." Brittany crossed her arms, nodding in enthusiastic agreement. "You heard her. Get out. Leave the keys on the table and do not even think about going upstairs to steal the jewelry or the designer clothes Nathan bought you. Those items were purchased with his money. They stay here." I lowered my head, hiding the chilling clarity forming in my eyes behind a veil of messy hair. They were commanding me to abandon a fortune in silk dresses, diamond earrings, and imported shoes. They believed they were stripping me bare, punishing me for my supposed failures. They did not comprehend that I was leaving those trivial items behind because they were useless artifacts of a dead life. I only carried what mattered: my untraceable offshore ledger, my passport, and the digital tokens verifying their impending ruin. I stood up slowly, keeping my posture hunched and defeated. I grasped the flimsy plastic handle of my scuffed suitcase. "Okay," I choked out, letting another sob hitch in my chest. "I am leaving." I shuffled toward the heavy mahogany door. Brittany stepped forward, placing a hand roughly on my shoulder, shoving me toward the threshold to hasten my exit. The physical contact was jarring, an unnecessary display of physical dominance from a woman drunk on stolen power. I stumbled slightly, catching myself on the doorframe, playing the fragile victim until the bitter end. Loretta watched my clumsy exit with a satisfied sneer. "Do not ever contact my son again, Kelsey. You are erased from this family." I stepped out onto the wide stone porch. The oppressive heat of the late afternoon hit me instantly, but it felt remarkably refreshing compared to the toxic atmosphere inside the foyer. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me with a thunderous crack, the deadbolt engaging with a sharp, metallic slide. I stood alone on the porch, surrounded by the towering loblolly pines and the sprawling acreage I had spent 8 years maintaining. The performance was over. I released my death grip on the plain gray cardigan. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back to release the tension of my feigned submission. My breathing slowed, evening out into a calm, steady rhythm. The sheer, breathtaking irony of the situation settled over me like a comforting blanket. Inside that house, Brittany and Loretta were likely pouring expensive champagne, celebrating their flawless hostile takeover. They were raising a glass to the forged deed, congratulating themselves on securing a multi-million-dollar estate. They were cementing their physical and legal possession of the property, establishing a documented, undeniable claim to the land and the structure. They had no idea they had just aggressively claimed ownership of a ticking time bomb. By wielding that forged deed and physically forcing me off the premises, Brittany established irrefutable legal occupancy. She legally chained herself to the estate. Neither she nor Loretta knew that this exact property was listed as the primary collateral for the toxic mezzanine loan Nathan had secured from the Shadow Syndicate. They were completely unaware that the 30-day grace period on that ruinous debt was rapidly expiring. More importantly, they did not know that the anonymous holding company currently possessing that defaulted loan was owned and operated by the very woman they just shoved out the front door. They thought they were stealing a palace. They had actually just volunteered to inhabit a financial slaughterhouse. When the default acceleration notices hit the county courthouse, the shadow creditors would not come looking for me. They would come looking for the documented residents occupying the collateral. Brittany and Loretta had happily painted a giant bullseye on their own backs, assuming full responsibility for a sinking ship. I grabbed the handle of my cheap suitcase and began the long walk down the gravel driveway. The stones crunched under my sneakers, a steady, rhythmic beat driving me forward. I did not look back at the grand colonial structure. I did not shed a single genuine tear. As I reached the heavy iron gates marking the property line, a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. My phone vibrated in the pocket of my jeans. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a secure message from Mitchell, my proxy attorney, operating out of Chicago. The text was brief and clinical. The eviction confirms their occupancy. The holding company is primed, awaiting your signal to initiate the strategic retreat and launch the next phase. I typed a single word in response. Proceed. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and stepped onto the paved shoulder of the rural highway. The setting sun cast a brilliant fiery glow across the Mississippi horizon, burning away the shadows of the past 8 years. I was walking away with nothing but a scuffed suitcase and a gray cardigan, leaving them to guard a fortress built on quicksand. The quiet phase of the war was finished. It was time to relocate to higher ground and watch the floodwaters rise. The sleek, tinted glass of the downtown corporate high-rise offered a panoramic view of the Mississippi River. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the muddy water churn against the current. The luxury suite was registered under a proxy holding company, shielding my presence from anyone searching for Kelsey Kelly. I dropped the scuffed suitcase onto the polished concrete floor. It looked entirely out of place against the minimalist Italian leather furniture and modern steel fixtures. The air smelled of expensive ozone filtration and fresh orchids resting on the credenza. I unzipped the flimsy canvas, abandoning the faded jeans and oversized sweaters I used as theatrical props. I retrieved a tailored charcoal blazer from my heavy leather tote bag, slipping it over my shoulders. The defeated victim left her role on the gravel driveway of the Pine Forest estate. The apex predator was now comfortably seated in her command center. I brewed a cup of dark roast coffee, savoring the bitter, rich taste. The silence of the penthouse was a welcome contrast to the toxic noise of my previous residence. My secure tablet chimed, signaling an incoming encrypted video call. I accepted the connection, and Mitchell appeared on the screen. The Chicago attorney sat in his own sterile office, looking over a stack of freshly filed court documents. His sharp features conveyed deep professional satisfaction. He took the bait, Kelsey Mitchell announced, holding up a dense legal filing. Nathan just submitted his asset division declarations to the county family court. He filed an emergency motion to formally assume all operational liabilities for the timber export firm and the primary residential estate. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the glass desk. He wants to ensure I cannot touch his perceived empire. Precisely, Mitchell nodded. His attorney drafted a highly restrictive clause barring you from claiming any future profits generated by the timber company. To justify boxing you out, Nathan legally bound himself to every single debt encumbrance and financial obligation tied to the business. He wants the judge to view him as the sole responsible custodian of the family legacy. He essentially built a fortress around the company to keep you out. I traced the edge of my tablet. Did he order a forensic audit before signing the assumption of liability? Mitchell let out a dry, hollow laugh. Not a single page. His hubris bypassed standard due diligence. He was so desperate to secure the assets and finalize the divorce before his new mistress got impatient that he signed the guarantor addendum blindly. He legally verified the fraudulent balance sheets in a court of law. By rushing to protect his fictional wealth, Nathan permanently chained himself to the toxic mezzanine debt. He handed the family court irrefutable proof that he owned the financial crater. While we reviewed the finalized snare, my secondary monitor displayed a live feed of social media updates. Brittany was not capable of quiet victory. She needed an audience. She posted a stream of photographs from the Delta Heritage Country Club. Nathan had rented the grand ballroom to throw an extravagant engagement party, flaunting their triumph to the regional elite. The images flickered across my screen. Brittany wore a stunning diamond ring, raising a crystal flute of champagne. Nathan stood beside her wearing a bespoke tuxedo, smiling with the relaxed confidence of a conqueror. Loretta and Tara hovered in the background, posing for photographs and celebrating the expulsion of the warehouse manager. They were toasting to their elevated status, dining on imported caviar and celebrating a future built on stolen capital. Their hubris was a blinding light. It was time to extinguish the bulb. I closed the social media tab and opened a highly secured proxy browser. I navigated to the official whistleblower portal for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The federal government does not care about messy divorces or country club gossip. They care about documented tax evasion and wire fraud. I uploaded the phantom ledger I extracted from Nathan's secure home workstation. I attached the dummy vendor invoices, the offshore routing numbers, and the audio recording of Brittany receiving her corporate salary while getting a pedicure. I drafted a concise clinical narrative outlining the exact mechanism Nathan used to siphon operational funds from the timber firm into untaxed personal accounts. I included the dates, the specific dollar amounts, and the digital signatures linking the transactions directly to Nathan and his new fiancée. I hit submit. The encrypted packet vanished into the federal database. The automated systems would flag the multi-million-dollar discrepancy within hours. When the federal agents arrived at the timber firm, they would not find a naive victim to blame. They would find the man who just proudly assumed total legal responsibility for the company ledgers in family court. Nathan was not the only Kelly brother deserving of a regulatory spotlight. Clayton tried to poach my agricultural clients to line his own pockets, assuming I was too fragile to fight back. He operated a decaying transport subsidiary, relying on falsified shipping weights and bypassed safety inspections to cut costs. I opened a new tab, directing my browser to the Regional Agricultural Regulatory Board. I compiled a secondary dossier using the logistical data I gathered during my tenure managing supply chains. I detailed Clayton's fraudulent shipping practices, highlighting the specific transport routes where his trucks bypassed mandatory weigh stations. I submitted the anonymous tip, attaching the falsified manifests he proudly presented to Garrett Henderson just days prior. The regulatory board thrives on heavy fines and swift audits. Clayton Transport Division would be grounded pending a full federal inspection before the end of the week. The Kelly family infrastructure was crumbling from every conceivable angle. I checked the digital calendar synchronized to my holding company dashboard. The red indicator light flashed, signaling the expiration of a critical deadline. The 30-day grace period on the toxic mezzanine loan Nathan secured against the family estate officially ended at midnight. He missed the exorbitant interest payment because his liquid cash was tied up in engagement rings and country club rentals. I unmuted the video call with Mitchell. The Chicago attorney was still reviewing the court filings, waiting for my final directive. "The grace period is over," I stated, my voice cold and unwavering. "The shadow loan is officially in default." Mitchell looked up from his paperwork, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the impending strike. "We hold the primary liens, Kelsey. We can trigger the acceleration clause immediately. Draft the demand letters," I instructed, staring at the frozen image of Nathan smiling in his tuxedo. "I want the formal notices of acceleration delivered to the timber firm and the residential estate by tomorrow morning. Demand the immediate repayment of the $5 million principal in full. When he inevitably fails to produce the cash, execute the foreclosure protocols on the property." "Consider it done," Mitchell replied, typing rapidly on his keyboard. "The board is set." I terminated the video connection, plunging the office back into quiet solitude. I poured a glass of sparkling water, letting the effervescence burn the back of my throat. I stood by the expansive window, watching the city lights flicker to life across the delta. The Kelly family believed they had successfully excised a tumor from their prestigious lineage. They threw a lavish party to celebrate my eviction. They had no idea they were dancing on the deck of a sinking ship. Tomorrow, the federal hounds would catch the scent, and the shadow creditors would knock on the front door. The quiet retreat was over. The slaughter was about to begin. The morning sun glared off the wide glass panels of my downtown corporate suite. I stood before the dual monitors, watching the digital architecture of the Kelly timber firm. The interface provided a live feed of their financial pulse. At precisely 9:15, the primary liquidity channels encountered a systemic blockade. The corporate credit line ceased to function. I tracked the incoming data packets as the routing software rejected a routine vendor payment. A second transaction failed seconds later. The screen populated with crimson error codes indicating a hard freeze on all operational capital. The financial hemorrhage was officially contained. During my tenure auditing their supply chain, I had installed the discrete diagnostic tool within their telecommunications server. It was originally designed to monitor freight dispatch calls for quality assurance. Today, it served as my private theater. I routed the audio feed through my encrypted speakers. The static cleared, revealing the crisp acoustic environment of Nathan's executive office. The dull thud of a fist striking a mahogany desk echoed through the speakers. Nathan was losing his temper. I listened as he barked orders at his lead accountant, a seasoned man named Arthur. Nathan demanded to know why the vendor drafts were bouncing. Arthur sounded terrified, stammering about a sudden institutional hold placed by the regional bank. The older accountant tried to explain that the automated clearinghouse refused to process any outgoing wires, citing insufficient collateral. Nathan refused to accept accountability. He paced the floor, his expensive leather shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood. He berated Arthur, calling him incompetent and threatening to terminate the entire finance department if the issue was not resolved within the hour. Nathan assumed it was a minor banking error, a clerical oversight causing a temporary delay. He believed his sterling reputation would clear the red tape. He dismissed Arthur, slamming the heavy office door shut with enough force to rattle the audio receiver. The silence in his office lasted for 3 agonizing minutes. I watched the cursor on my screen mapping his next move. He bypassed the traditional banking channels, dialing a secure, unlisted number. The dialing tone hummed through my speakers. He was contacting the Shadow Lending Syndicate, hoping to negotiate a brief extension on the mezzanine loan he had defaulted on at midnight. He believed his charm and his family name could secure a temporary reprieve. A gruff, unpolished voice answered the line, identifying the private equity firm. Nathan adopted a smooth, confident tone, masking his rising panic. He spoke of minor cash flow disruptions and promised a substantial wire transfer by the end of the business week. The representative on the other end let out a harsh, dry laugh. The sound cut through Nathan's rehearsed charm. The lender informed him that the syndicate no longer held the debt. They sold the entire portfolio, including the residential collateral liens, to an anonymous holding company weeks ago. The representative stated they had zero authority to grant extensions and ended the call with a sharp click. The gravity of the situation crashed into the executive office. The audio feed captured the sound of Nathan breathing heavily, his chest heaving as the reality of his predicament took shape. He no longer controlled the survival of his own company. A faceless corporate entity owned his debt, and they possessed the legal right to seize everything he valued. The walls of his carefully constructed fortress were crumbling. Desperation replaced his arrogance. He needed an immediate infusion of untraceable cash to satisfy the anonymous creditors before the foreclosure notices became public. He picked up the receiver and dialed his mother. Loretta answered, her voice light and cheerful, likely expecting an update on wedding preparations or a country club gossip. Nathan did not offer pleasantries. His voice cracked, dropping into a frantic whisper. He told her the timber firm was facing a catastrophic liquidity crisis. He demanded immediate access to her private retirement funds, pleading for a wire transfer to cover the impending shortfall. Loretta gasped, the sound transmitting clearly through the intercepted feed. The pristine illusion of her successful son vanished. She demanded an explanation, asking how a legacy timber empire could evaporate overnight. Nathan scrambled to formulate an excuse, blaming market fluctuations and delayed international tariffs. He could not admit he drained the corporate accounts to finance a mistress. He begged her to liquidate her stock portfolios, emphasizing that they would lose the Pine Forest estate if she refused to help. The deep financial rot was finally exposed to the matriarch. Loretta began to cry, her aristocratic composure shattering under the weight of their impending ruin. She told him the retirement funds were tied up in restrictive trusts and hung up the phone, leaving him stranded. She offered no maternal comfort, only the cold rejection characteristic of their elite social circle. Before Nathan could process his mother rejecting him, the heavy office door burst open. The acoustic feed peaked as Clayton stormed into the room. The younger brother was furious, his voice vibrating with unchecked rage. Clayton demanded to know why the Regional Agricultural Regulatory Board just raided his transport subsidiary. He yelled that his trucks were grounded, his manifests were seized, and his most lucrative logistics clients were dropping their contracts. The anonymous tip I submitted the night before had triggered a sweeping federal inspection, paralyzing Clayton's entire operation. Clayton accused Nathan of mismanaging the Umbrella Corporation, claiming the regulatory heat was a direct result of the timber firm failing to pay municipal taxes. Nathan fired back, his panic mutating into vicious anger. He mocked Clayton, calling his transport division a pathetic drain on family resources. The brothers turned their aggression toward each other, exchanging vicious insults and exposing decades of deep-seated resentment. The Kelly family was imploding. The loyalty they paraded at Sunday dinners dissolved the moment their wealth vanished. They were two cornered animals, fighting over the scraps of a dying empire. I muted the audio feed, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. The digital dashboard continued to flash, mapping the cascading failures across their corporate network. The dominoes were falling in perfect synchronization. The false superiority they wielded against me was gone, replaced by the suffocating grip of their own incompetence. They built a house on a foundation of lies, and I simply removed the load-bearing pillars. The resulting collapse was a masterpiece of financial gravity. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Mitchell. The attorney answered instantly, ready for the next phase of the operation. "The internal structure is broken," I informed him, watching the red error codes multiply on my screen. "They are bleeding out and turning on each other. It is time to bring them into the light." I instructed Mitchell to contact Nathan legal counsel immediately. He was to invite them to a formal mediation session at a high-end law firm downtown. The stated purpose of the meeting would be to finalize the surrender of my marital assets and sign the expedited divorce settlement. Nathan would view this invitation as his saving grace. He would believe I was finally capitulating, offering him the exact legal victory he needed to secure the estate and appease his panicked family. He would walk into that conference room expecting to conquer a broken woman. He would bring his lawyers, his mistress, and his parents, eager to witness my final surrender. Mitchell agreed to draft the invitation using language designed to stroke Nathan's inflated ego. He would frame the mediation as a mere formality, baiting them into a public arena where their destruction could be legally cemented on the record. I ended the call, turning my gaze back to the sprawling Mississippi River outside my window. The bait was in the water. The predators were starving and desperate. They would rush to the table, blinded by their own greed, entirely unaware that the feast they anticipated was actually a meticulously engineered slaughter. The elevator ascended smoothly toward the 50th floor of the downtown legal district. My ears popped, adjusting to the pressurized cabin as I stared at my reflection in the polished steel doors. I wore a faded gray sweater that hung several inches past my waist, drowning my frame in excess fabric. The sleeves were pulled down, hiding my hands. Paired with worn denim and scuffed leather flats, the outfit projected the exact image of a defeated, destitute woman harboring no remaining fight. The doors parted, revealing a sprawling reception area encased in frosted glass and imported marble. Mitchell, my proxy attorney, stood waiting near a modern sculpture. We exchanged a single silent nod. He directed me down a long corridor illuminated by recessed lighting toward the primary mediation suite. The room was a sterile corporate theater featuring a vast walnut table surrounded by ergonomic leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the muddy Mississippi River winding through the delta. But the air inside was chilled to a rigid, uncomfortable temperature. A digital audio recorder sat dead center on the polished wood, a blinking red light indicating the session was already capturing sound. I selected a seat facing the entryway, sinking into the plush leather. I pulled my knees tightly together and hunched my shoulders inward. I fixed my gaze on the grain of the walnut table. The broken bell was in position, awaiting her final audience. 10 minutes later, the heavy glass doors swung open. The Kelly family did not simply enter the room, they invaded the space with towering, unearned entitlement. Nathan led the procession. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit tailored to accentuate his shoulders. His silk tie featured a sharp Windsor knot, projecting unyielding authority. He walked with the brisk, confident stride of a man who firmly believed he had outmaneuvered a crippling financial crisis. Brittany trailed closely behind him, moving to assert her territorial claim. She carried a designer handbag, resting her hand intimately on his arm. She wore a tailored ivory dress, clearly intending to treat this legal mediation as a victory lap. Loretta and Judson followed their footsteps, synchronized with aristocratic pride. My father-in-law wore a grim, stoic expression, harboring a quiet desperation to see his timber legacy legally shielded from my grasp. Loretta clutched a pearl necklace, her eyes sweeping over my faded sweater with undisguised contempt. Finally, Nathan brought his legal counsel. The attorney was a tall, imposing figure, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He arranged his files on the table with practiced intimidation, moving with the fluid grace of a corporate shark smelling blood in the water. The lawyer dispensed with pleasantries. He unclasped his briefcase, retrieving a dense stack of legal documents printed on premium bond paper. He slid the packet across the walnut surface, stopping it directly in front of my folded hands. "This is the finalized dissolution of marriage and division of assets," the attorney stated, his tone dripping with patronizing patience. "We are here to execute these terms on the official record. As stipulated, my client is asserting full and exclusive operational control over the timber export firm, as well as the primary residential estate." The lawyer paused, tapping his expensive fountain pen against his yellow legal pad to command the room. "Given your recent documented struggles with mental stability, my client is taking the extraordinary step of shielding you from any potential fallout. Nathan is formally assuming every single debt encumbrance and financial liability tied to both the business and the property. You waive all rights to spousal support and any claim to future profits. In exchange, he is providing a one-time relocation stipend of $3,000. Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and revulsion, playing the role of the benevolent caretaker burdened by a broken spouse. "This is the best outcome for you, Kelsey," he murmured, adopting his favorite gaslighting cadence. "You need to focus on healing your fractured mind. You cannot handle the pressure of the logistics industry, let alone the complex liabilities of our family portfolio. Take the settlement. Rent a quiet apartment somewhere cheap. Let me carry the heavy burdens." Brittany shifted in her leather chair, letting out a soft, mocking sigh. She inspected her manicured fingernails, clearly bored by the legal formalities. She wanted the signature so she could finalize her elevation to the new lady of the manor. She viewed me as a pathetic hurdle standing between her and a luxurious future. Loretta chimed in, her voice laced with venom. "We are being far too generous considering the embarrassment you caused this family. You brought nothing to this lineage but warehouse dust. Sign the papers and disappear so my son can rebuild his life with a proper partner." I lowered my head, staring intently at the thick settlement agreement. The air in the conference room felt thin. I forced my breathing to accelerate, taking short, jagged gasps that echoed audibly in the quiet suite. My shoulders shook beneath the oversized sweater. I reached out from under the long woolen sleeves, picking up the silver pen the lawyer had provided. My hand trembled so severely, the metal tip rattled rhythmically against the surface of the desk. I looked up at the blinking red light of the digital audio recorder. "I need to be sure," I whispered, letting my voice crack with fabricated terror. "I need it on the record. If I sign away my home and my savings, I need to know I am safe from your creditors." Nathan let out a harsh laugh, rolling his eyes toward the ceiling. "You are safe, Kelsey. I am taking all the risk. I am absorbing the entire corporate footprint to protect you from yourself." I swallowed hard, maintaining the terrified facade. My eyes darted frantically between his confident face and the recording device. "So you and your family are willingly accepting every corporate and residential liability without contest?" I asked, keeping my gaze locked on the blinking red light. "You guarantee that the timber firm debts and the estate encumbrances are your sole responsibility, no matter what happens to the market?" Nathan slammed his palm flat against the table, irritated by my perceived hesitation and desperate to finalize his firewall. "Yes, Kelsey, I accept all of it," he snapped, his voice ringing with arrogant certainty. "Every loan, every mortgage, every outstanding operational balance, it is all mine. I own the assets and I own the liabilities. Just sign the document so we can end this miserable chapter." His lawyer pushed a separate page across the wood, positioning it squarely in front of his client. "This is the guarantor addendum," the attorney explained, pointing to a designated line. "My client will sign this, confirming his unconditional assumption of the liabilities." Nathan snatched his own pen and scrawled his signature across the page, pressing hard enough to indent the premium paper underneath. He threw the pen down, sliding the signed addendum toward the center of the table. His hubris had eclipsed his basic survival instincts. He was so desperate to fence me out of his imaginary wealth that he blindly bound himself to the toxic debt I secretly owned. The ink dried on the white page. The legal snare clicked shut, securing his fate in an unbreakable cage of his own design. I looked at his signature. The sharp loops and forceful angles of his handwriting mirrored the entitlement that brought him to this room. The silence stretched, holding the tension of a drawn bowstring. I still held the silver pen hovering over the line requiring my surrender. Brittany leaned forward, an expectant, greedy gleam shining in her eyes. "Sign it," she hissed, her patience entirely depleted. "We have a caterer waiting to discuss the wedding menu, and you are wasting our time." I took one final shallow breath, playing the frightened victim for the very last second. Then I exhaled a long, slow, steady stream of air. I set the silver pen down on the polished walnut table. The metal cylinder rolled a few inches before coming to a complete stop against a glass water pitcher. The trembling in my hands vanished instantly. My spine straightened, shedding the hunched posture of the defeated exile. I rolled the long sleeves of the oversized gray sweater up to my elbows, revealing steady, calm hands. I tilted my chin upward, looking directly into Nathan's eyes, stripping away the illusion of my fragile sanity. The weeping, paranoid wife was gone. The apex predator had arrived at the table. I grasped the hem of the faded gray sweater. I pulled the heavy yarn over my head in a single fluid motion. Beneath the stifling fabric, I wore a sharp, tailored charcoal blazer layered over a crisp, ivory silk blouse. I let the discarded sweater fall onto the empty chair beside me. The sudden physical transformation sucked the available oxygen out of the glass-walled suite. The posture of the defeated exile vanished. My spine straightened, aligning my shoulders with the quiet confidence of an apex predator inspecting trapped prey. Nathan frowned, his patronizing smirk melting into a mask of pure confusion. He blinked rapidly, trying to reconcile the weeping victim he left on the gravel driveway with the composed executive sitting across the polished walnut table. Brittany stopped inspecting her manicured nails, her smug expression faltering as the dynamic in the room shifted. Loretta narrowed her eyes, sensing a disruption in her carefully orchestrated victory. I reached into my heavy leather tote bag and extracted a pristine legal binder. I slid the thick portfolio across the wood. It glided with a soft hiss, stopping directly against the edge of the opposing counsel yellow notepad. "Before we discuss nominal relocation stipends," I stated, my voice echoing with crystalline clarity, "we need to review the binding parameters of this union." The attorney furrowed his brow, flipping open the heavy cover. His eyes scanned the introductory pages, recognizing the notary seals from 8 years ago. This was our original, unaltered prenuptial agreement. Section 4, paragraph B, I instructed, watching the lawyer track the text with his expensive fountain pen. "Read the financial fidelity clause." The attorney traced the dense legal jargon. The ambient hum of the climate control system seemed to amplify in the heavy silence. The text mandated that any party engaging in marital embezzlement, hidden asset diversion, or fraudulent leveraging forfeits all claims to the joint estate. It stipulated the offending party surrenders equity to the injured spouse. The lawyer stopped tapping his pen. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent shade. He looked at Nathan with profound dread, realizing his client had hidden crucial structural defects in their case. The attorney swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing against his starched white collar. Representing a fool is one thing. Representing a perjurer is career suicide. Nathan scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. He claimed those clauses were standard boilerplate, insisting they held no bearing on his current operational control. I ignored his hollow posturing. Mitchell sat beside me, watching the execution unfold with the detached satisfaction of a seasoned litigator. He did not need to speak. The documents I brought did all the heavy lifting. I pulled a second set of documents from my tote. These pages bore the stark official stamp of the county clerk. I dropped them onto the center of the table. The sharp smack of paper hitting wood made Loretta flinch in her seat. These are formal notices of default and immediate acceleration, I explained, leaning back into my ergonomic chair. They are issued regarding the $5 million mezzanine loan you secured 8 months ago. The grace period expired at midnight. The principal is now due in full. Nathan stopped breathing. His chest froze as he stared at the foreclosure notices. He sputtered a denial, insisting the Shadow Syndicate owned that debt. He stammered that the portfolio had been sold to an anonymous holding company weeks prior. He leaned over the table, desperately trying to read the creditor letterhead on the default notices. It was sold, I confirmed, locking my gaze onto his terrified eyes. I am the chief executive officer of that holding company. I purchased your toxic paper for pennies on the dollar, using the independent offshore capital you tried to steal with your ruined coffee-stained tax addendum. I own the debt, Nathan. I am your primary secured creditor. I gestured toward the liability assumption document he had just proudly signed minutes ago. And since you just placed your signature on that court record, binding yourself to every single corporate encumbrance without contest, you just volunteered to take the fall for the entire balance. You built a firewall to keep me out, but you locked yourself inside a burning building. Brittany stood up, her face flushing a mottled shade of red. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out the property deed Nathan had forged for her. She slapped the paper onto the table shrilly, declaring that she owned the estate and my claims meant nothing. She insisted the house belonged to her now, pointing a trembling finger at my face. I looked at the junior executive with cold, clinical detachment. That deed is a fraudulent instrument, I noted, pointing toward the prenup the lawyer still clutched. Under our binding contract, no marital property can be transferred without joint notarized consent. Your document is legally void. But more importantly, the property itself is no longer his to give. I slid the final stack of papers across the table, directing them straight toward Judson and Loretta. My father-in-law picked up the pages with shaking hands. His eyes darted across the fine print. Look at the collateral annex, Judson I instructed softly. Read the specific addresses listed to secure the toxic loan. Judson read the coordinates. He drops the paper as if it were coated in acid. Loretta leaned over, squinting at the text. The realization struck her with physical force. She let out a sharp, breathless gasp, pressing a manicured hand over her chest. The pristine illusion of their aristocratic invulnerability fractured right in front of my eyes. Judson gripped the edge of the walnut table, his knuckles straining against his wrinkled skin. The timber fortune his father built, the legacy he intended to pass down, was gone. It had evaporated to cover up a cheap office romance. Your son needed cash to mask the rot inside his timber export firm, I explained to the older couple, ensuring every syllable landed with devastating precision. He needed liquid capital to fund his junior executive lavish lifestyle. To get that money, he cross-collateralized the business debt against your sprawling colonial estate. He forged the corporate resolutions and mortgaged your generational wealth. He sold the roof over your heads to buy her diamond tennis bracelets. Judson turned slowly to look at his son, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. Loretta stared at Brittany glittering jewelry, her high society composure dissolving into raw horror. She realized the young, vibrant woman she welcomed into her home was wearing stolen family funds. The facade of the Kelly family shattered into a million jagged pieces right there in the glass-walled suite. Nathan shrank back into his leather chair. The arrogant executive disappeared, replaced by a cornered, hyperventilating animal. He looked at his lawyer for salvation, seeking a loophole or a legal maneuver to save him from ruin. The attorney, however, was already sliding his files back into his briefcase. He snapped the brass locks shut, avoiding eye contact with the men he once represented. He wanted to distance himself from a client guilty of egregious federal fraud and reckless financial maneuvers. The trap I spent weeks building had finally snapped shut, catching every single predator in its steel jaws. They sat in the sterile conference room, paralyzed by the consequences of their own greed. They stripped away my dignity, stole my peace, and attempted to erase my future. In return, I dismantled their entire universe. The silence in the glass-walled conference room grew suffocating. The climate control system hummed a low, steady drone, but the temperature felt sweltering to the people trapped across the polished walnut table. I kept my eyes locked on the junior executive. The mathematical reality was finally clicking together behind her contoured face. Brittany stared at the foreclosure notices resting on the wood, and then slowly turned her head to look at the man sitting next to her. The affluent executive she tied her entire future to was an illusion. The private jets, the designer clothes, the sprawling pine forest estate she had bragged about seizing were all vapor. Nathan was not a titan of industry. He was a bankrupt fraud, and the woman sitting opposite them owned the exact ground he stood on. Brittany swallowed hard, her throat visibly bobbing. She pushed her ergonomic chair back, creating physical distance between herself and Nathan. The proprietary grip she held on his arm dissolved. She looked at the corporate lawyer who was hastily packing his leather briefcase, and then directed a wide, panicked gaze toward me. "I had nothing to do with his business loans," Brittany stammered, her voice stripped of its toxic sweetness. "I am just a junior employee. He told me the export company was generating record profits. I did not know anything about a shadow syndicate or mortgaged houses. He bought those gifts with his own money. You cannot drag me into this mess, Kelsey. I am a victim here too." She was pivoting with breathtaking speed. The moment the gold ran out, the loyalty evaporated. She was ready to throw the man she intended to marry directly under the tracks of a moving train to save her own skin. I did not smile. I reached into my heavy leather tote bag one final time. I withdrew a plain manila folder and placed it gently onto the polished wood. I pushed it forward with a single index finger, allowing it to glide until it stopped right in front of her clenched hands. "I do not need to drag you into anything, Brittany," I stated, my tone echoing with cold, clinical precision. "You walked into the snare all by yourself." Brittany hesitated, her manicured fingers trembling as she opened the cover. Her eyes darted across the top page. It was a printed copy of the exact dossier I transmitted to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. "You are not a victim," I explained, watching her read the detailed federal documents. "You are a registered agent of a limited liability corporation. Nathan used your entity as a dummy vendor to siphon operational capital from his timber export firm. He routed the funds to you under the guise of logistics consulting fees. Those transfers bypass standard corporate tax protocols." Brittany shook her head, her breathing turning rapid and shallow. "I did not know what those papers were. He just told me to sign them for tax benefits. I never provided any consulting services. I just did what my boss instructed me to do." "That is exactly the point," I countered smoothly. "You collected a corporate salary while sitting in a day spa getting a pedicure. I have the audio recording of that specific phone call, and it is already sitting in a federal database. You signed the vendor checks, Brittany. Your digital signature is on the routing transfers. You accepted untaxed stolen capital to fund your weekend trips and purchase those diamond rings. She stared at the photocopied checks bearing her distinct looping signature. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and hollow. The designer ivory dress she wore suddenly looked like a prison uniform. In the eyes of the federal government, I continued ensuring every word landed with surgical impact. You are not a naive girlfriend. You are an active, willing accessory to federal wire fraud and corporate tax evasion. When the auditors raid the timber firm later today, they will seize your personal accounts. You are not going to be the new lady of a grand estate. You are facing a staggering length of time in a federal penitentiary. The sheer terror of a prison sentence broke her entirely. Brittany let out a high-pitched wail. Tears spilled over her eyelashes, ruining her expensive makeup. She stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floorboards. She turned on Nathan, her face twisting in pure, vicious rage. "You ruined my life," she screamed, hitting his shoulder with her leather purse. "You told me you were rich. You told me we were untouchable. You are a pathetic liar. I am going to jail because of you." Nathan recoiled, shielding his face from her frantic blows. He pushed her away, his own panic mutating into raw, cornered fury. He looked at his attorney, who was now standing by the door, eager to escape the imploding room. "Do something!" Nathan shouted at the lawyer, his voice cracking with desperation. "You drafted the liability assumption. You told me it would protect the assets. Fix this right now." The attorney adjusted his suit jacket, refusing to step back toward the table. "I advised you to secure your assets," he replied, his tone dripping with professional distance. "I did not advise you to commit severe financial fraud or conceal a toxic loan from your own legal counsel. My representation concludes at this exact moment. I suggest you retain a specialized criminal defense litigator immediately." The lawyer opened the glass door and walked out, leaving Nathan stranded in the wreckage. Loretta could no longer maintain her aristocratic silence. The matriarch realized her beloved colonial home, the cornerstone of her high society identity, was scheduled for an auction block. The weeping willows and the grand mahogany staircase she prized were slipping through her fingers. She rose from her chair, her hands shaking as she pointed a finger at her son. "How could you do this to us?" Loretta shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "Your father built this legacy. We trusted you to run the export business. You mortgaged the roof over my head to buy trinkets for a cheap secretary. You destroyed the Kelly name. We are going to be laughingstocks in the Delta. We are going to be homeless." "Mother, please," Nathan begged, crawling out of his chair and reaching toward her. "I can fix the deficit. I just need a little time to secure a new investor. I can restructure the firm." Judson stood up, his face a terrifying shade of crimson. He slapped Nathan's hand away, refusing the contact. "There is no firm left to restructure," Judson roared, the sound vibrating with decades of wasted pride. "She owns the debt. The federal agents are auditing the ledgers. You are a disgrace to this family." The conference room devolved into a symphony of mutual betrayal. The loyalties they paraded at Sunday dinners fractured into dust. Loretta wept, loudly cursing the day Nathan was born. Judson paced the floor, clutching his chest and muttering about his ruined reputation. Brittany sobbed in the corner, smearing her mascara, staring at the tax documents as if they were a death warrant. Nathan stood in the center of the chaos, hyperventilating, his bespoke suit wrinkling as he tugged frantically at his silk tie, trying to draw oxygen into his restricting lungs. They were tearing each other apart. The superior bloodline they boasted about was nothing but a fragile illusion sustained by stolen money and unchecked arrogance. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to hurl insults. I simply provided the truth and let their own toxic nature handle the execution. I watched the spectacle for a long, quiet moment. The broken bell they sought to humiliate was gone. The woman they tried to discard was currently sitting at the head of the table, holding the deed to their entire existence. The equilibrium of the universe was restored. I reached forward, gathering the original prenuptial agreement and the foreclosure notices. I tapped the edges of the premium paper against the walnut table, aligning them into a neat stack. I slipped the documents back into my heaven leather tote bag. I stood up, smoothing the tailored fabric of my charcoal blazer. My movements were unhurried and precise. The sound of my chair sliding backward cut through their frantic shouting. The Kelly family froze, turning their desperate eyes toward me. They looked like survivors of a shipwreck staring at a passing vessel that refused to throw them a lifeline. Nathan took a hesitant step forward, his hands outstretched in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Kelsey, he choked out a fresh wave of sweat glistening on his forehead. Please, you won. You proved your point. Just give me the digital tokens back. Let me call the bank. We can negotiate a settlement. I will give you anything you ask for. I slung the tote bag over my shoulder, feeling the satisfying weight of the encrypted drive and the legal paperwork resting against my side. I looked at the man who had tried to gaslight me into a nervous breakdown. I looked at the woman who had smirked near the magnolias, plotting my replacement. I looked at the in-laws who had welcomed my destruction with open arms. There is nothing left to negotiate, Nathan, I said, my voice carrying a quiet, chilling finality. I am not taking your money. I am taking your future. I turned and walked toward the glass doors. I paused at the threshold, looking back at him one last time. He stood trembling amid the ruins of his stolen kingdom. You wanted everything, Nathan, I stated, holding his terrified gaze. Now you have it. I pushed the heavy door open and walked down the illuminated corridor, leaving them trapped in the cage they built themselves. 6 months have passed since the heavy glass doors of the downtown mediation suite closed behind me. The stifling summer heat of the Mississippi Delta has finally surrendered to the crisp, cool air of early autumn. I am standing on the elevated concrete loading dock of my newly acquired logistics headquarters. The scent of raw diesel fuel mixes perfectly with the bitter aroma of the dark French roast coffee in my ceramic mug. A convoy of heavy freight trucks idles in the staging area, their large engines rumbling with productive power. The sun is just beginning to rise over the fertile agricultural fields, casting a brilliant golden light across the horizon. I am watching my fleet depart for the coastal ports, ensuring the supply chains of the entire region operate with flawless precision. I am no longer a senior auditor working for someone else. I am the chief executive officer and the sole proprietor of the most successful freight management firm in the state. I did not just survive the hostile takeover my husband attempted to execute. I absorbed the vast vacuum his destruction left behind. The fallout from the glass boardroom was swift, decisive, and undeniably public. The exact timeline I calculated played out with terrifying accuracy. Exactly 2 hours after I walked out of that high-end law firm, leaving the Kelly family hyperventilating around the walnut table, the federal government arrived at the timber export headquarters. The Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division does not knock politely. Dozens of agents swarmed the corporate campus, seizing every physical ledger, hard drive, and digital server. Nathan and Brittany were standing in the lobby, frantically trying to pack personal items when the federal tactical team surrounded them. They were placed in heavy steel handcuffs and escorted out of the glass building in front of their entire administrative staff. The local news crews captured the arrest, broadcasting their public humiliation across every television screen in the Delta. Because my holding company legally seized the remaining corporate capital and the offshore accounts were frozen solid, Nathan had zero liquidity to mount a legal defense. The arrogant vice president who previously boasted about his superior wealth was forced to rely on an overworked public defender. The criminal proceedings quickly dissolved into a vicious spectacle of mutual betrayal. The romantic illusion Brittany clung to shattered the moment she traded her designer silk dresses for a standard county jail uniform. She immediately attempted to flip on Nathan, offering to testify as a cooperating state witness in exchange for full federal immunity. She sat in the courtroom crying and claiming she was manipulated into signing the fraudulent vendor checks. Her performance might have worked if the prosecutors did not possess the high-definition audio recording of her enjoying a luxury pedicure while collecting her illicit corporate salary. The judge rejected her plea agreement out of hand. They are both currently sitting in federal holding cells, awaiting a trial that carries severe mandatory minimum sentences for extensive wire fraud and staggering corporate tax evasion. Clayton suffered an equally devastating collapse. The Regional Agricultural Regulatory Board grounded his entire transport subsidiary the very next morning. The anonymous dossier I submitted prompted a comprehensive federal inspection of his fleet. The investigators uncovered decades of falsified shipping weights, bypassed safety protocols, and extensive environmental violations. His trucking contracts were immediately voided by every major client in the state, including Garrett Henderson, who publicly denounced the Kelly family business practices. The steep regulatory fines bankrupted the subsidiary within 30 days. Clayton was forced to liquidate his trucks for scrap metal to avoid personal jail time. The last I heard, the arrogant brother who tried to poach my clients was working a graveyard shift as a low-level dispatch operator for a rival freight company, stripped entirely of his unearned pride. But the most poetic justice was reserved for the architects of the family entitlement. Loretta and Judson learned exactly what it means to be discarded by the society they worshipped. When the 30-day grace period on the toxic mezzanine loan expired, my holding company officially executed the foreclosure protocols on their sprawling pine forest estate. Loretta frantically called her wealthy country club associates, begging for a private loan to cover the defaulted balance. But old money is incredibly protective of its reputation. The moment the federal indictments hit the evening news, the Kelly family became toxic pariahs. Their calls went straight to voicemail. Their country club memberships were quietly revoked. The social freeze-out they once weaponized against me was applied to them with unforgiving exactness. The county sheriff arrived at the colonial estate on a Tuesday morning, presenting the formal eviction notice. Loretta and Judson were forced to vacate the property they believed they would own forever. They packed their belongings into a rented moving truck, watching in horror as a private security firm changed the locks on the heavy oak doors. Because they were utterly destitute, they were forced to downsize drastically. They currently reside in a cramped two-bedroom apartment located in a noisy industrial zoning district, far removed from the pristine manicured lawns of their former life. Tara attempted to distance herself from the scandal, but her husband filed for divorce, citing the irreparable damage her family caused to his own professional standing. The antique silver tea service Tara coveted so deeply was eventually pawned just to pay for basic legal consultations. I did not keep the colonial estate. The structure held too many hollow memories and bore the stench of their towering arrogance. I placed the property on the commercial market and sold it to the highest bidder. The land was purchased by a regional real estate developer. They brought in heavy machinery last month, bulldozing the grand colonial house, leveling the weeping willows and the intricate mahogany architecture to the bare earth. In its place, they are currently constructing a sprawling concrete distribution warehouse. The physical legacy of the Kelly timber empire was wholly erased from the map, replaced by the very industry they always considered pedestrian and beneath them. I take another slow sip of my coffee, letting the morning breeze cool my face. The narrative of my marriage serves as a profound, permanent lesson in the mechanics of power and self-preservation. We are frequently conditioned to tolerate unacceptable behavior under the guise of maintaining peace. When an arrogant partner attempts to manipulate your reality, trying to convince you your mind is failing, it is easy to surrender. It is easy to internalize the blame and accept the role of the broken victim. Toxic individuals rely heavily on your silence and your compliance to build their fraudulent empires. They drain your resources, mock your career, and isolate you from your own strength, assuming you will never have the courage to audit the ledger. But true power is never derived from participating in their chaotic emotional warfare. Your inherent self-worth should never be dictated by the fragile ego of a person desperately trying to hide their own vast incompetence. When they try to rewrite your reality, you do not argue with their delusions. You step back into the quiet shadows and you gather the data. You secure your perimeter. You lock down your assets, and you compile the undeniable proof of their betrayal. You harness your patience, allowing their blinding arrogance to dictate their actions. The greatest revenge is never loud, and it never requires raising your voice. The ultimate victory is stepping aside, maintaining your boundaries, and letting toxic people blindly assemble their own guillotines. The sun clears the horizon, washing the concrete loading dock in bright, warm light. My logistics supervisors wave to me from the staging area, holding their clipboards ready to begin another highly profitable day. I offer them a genuine, confident nod in return. I am Kelsey Kelly, and I am standing firmly on the foundation I built entirely by myself. The heavy baggage of a fraudulent marriage is gone, stripped away and burned in the fire of undeniable truth. I turn my back on the rising sun, walking purposefully into my thriving corporate headquarters, unburdened and truly invincible. The ashes of a ruined empire offer the most fertile soil for profound reflection. When we witness the spectacular, catastrophic collapse of a dynasty like the Kelly family, it is remarkably easy to focus on the immediate mechanics of their downfall. We dissect the fraudulent ledgers, the toxic mezzanine loans, and the breathtaking audacity of a husband attempting to gaslight his brilliant wife into a fabricated nervous breakdown. We marvel at the clinical precision of the retaliation. Yet to view this saga merely as a financial thriller or a satisfying tale of marital revenge is to miss the far more insidious underlying tragedy. The total obliteration of Nathan and his towering legacy was not born in a downtown mediation suite or a hidden pine forest cabin. It was born decades earlier at a polished mahogany dining table under the watchful, approving eyes of his parents. The true collapse began with a profound generational failure in parenting. In the relentless pursuit of the American dream, we frequently confuse the accumulation of wealth with the cultivation of character. We spend our lives building fortresses of comfort, securing trust funds, and maintaining a pristine social facade, believing these material walls will protect our children from the harsh realities of the world. Loretta and Judson Kelly embodied this toxic philosophy. They raised their sons in an environment entirely devoid of natural consequences. When a child is consistently shielded from the repercussions of their own arrogance, they do not learn resilience. They learn absolute entitlement. They are taught that the rules of fairness, honesty, and basic human decency are optional constraints meant only for those lacking the proper pedigree. True family responsibility requires the grueling, unglamorous work of holding our children accountable. It demands that we teach them the heavy weight of integrity, even when lying is easier and more profitable. The Kelly matriarch and patriarch failed to instill a moral compass in their heir. Instead, they nurtured a fragile, dangerous narcissism. They applauded Nathan's superficial charm and turned a blind eye to his profound lack of emotional awareness. When he brought a mistress into his inner circle and plotted to destroy the woman who stabilized his life, his parents did not reprimand his deceit. They harbored his betrayal. They actively participated in the psychological warfare against their own daughter-in-law, mistaking their son's cruelty for strength and his deceit for cleverness. If you are finding value in these explorations of human nature and the hidden dynamics that shape our lives, please drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to Samantha Told Stories, where we continuously unravel the complex, often unseen threads of relationships, family dynamics, and personal empowerment. Emotional awareness is the bedrock of a healthy traditional family structure. It is the quiet ability to recognize the humanity in others, to practice empathy, and to navigate conflict with grace rather than malice. Nathan lacked this entirely because it was never modeled for him. He viewed people as expendable assets to be managed, utilized, and ultimately discarded when their utility expired. This severe emotional blindness left him incapable of recognizing the formidable intellect of the woman he was trying to break. He underestimated his wife because his parents taught him to underestimate anyone who did not share his exact lineage. He confused her silence for submission, never realizing that genuine strength rarely needs to shout to be heard. In our modern culture, we often romanticize the concept of the ruthless conqueror, the executive who bends the market to his will, the heir who crushes the competition without a second thought. But enduring family values are rooted in a very different soil. They are anchored in fundamental fairness. Fairness is not weakness. It is the ultimate form of sustainable power. When we raise children without an ingrained sense of justice, we send them into the world unequipped to handle genuine adversity. Nathan's inability to play fair, his reliance on forgery, embezzlement, and manipulation, was the direct result of a childhood where the ends always justified the means. He stole from his own legacy to finance a fleeting illusion because he possessed no internal anchor of honesty to keep him grounded. The destruction of this specific family serves as a terrifying mirror for any parent navigating the complexities of raising the next generation. We must ask ourselves what kind of architecture we are building within the minds of our children. Are we constructing sturdy frameworks of accountability? Or are we building hollow facades of unearned superiority? If we prioritize the preservation of a social image over the painful, necessary lessons of emotional growth, we are quietly laying the dynamite that will eventually level our own houses. Our primary duty is not to leave our offspring a sprawling estate or a vast corporate portfolio. Those things are incredibly fragile. They can be seized by federal auditors or lost to a single catastrophic stroke of an executive pen. Our absolute obligation is to leave them with the internal fortitude to rebuild when the mansion inevitably burns to the ground. A parent's job is to make themselves obsolete, equipping the child with the moral tools required to navigate a society that does not care about their last name. We often operate under the deeply flawed assumption that unconditional love requires unconditional protection. We believe that a good parent softens every blow, paves every road, and eliminates every obstacle in their child's path. But this is the grand, tragic illusion of modern parenting. A child who has never felt the sharp sting of a scraped knee or the crushing weight of a personal failure is a child utterly defenseless against the real world. By removing the struggle, we do not save them, we actively disarm them. The conventional wisdom dictates that we owe our children a soft, comfortable life. I argue the exact opposite. We owe our children the gift of managed adversity. We owe them the absolute necessity of experiencing disappointment, the heavy burden of answering for their own mistakes, and the quiet dignity of earning their own redemption. Providing a frictionless existence is the most insidious form of child neglect. It breeds beautiful, hollow vessels, incapable of surviving the storms they provoke, leaving them to shatter at the first sign of genuine pressure. Perhaps the ultimate measure of a family's legacy is not found in what they manage to pass down, but in what they bravely choose to withhold. True love is sometimes the steadfast refusal to offer a lifeline. As you look at the faces sitting across your own dining table tonight, consider the terrifying possibility that the greatest threat to their future is not the